You're watching Medfield TV, Community Shows.
Portion of the Board of Selectmen meeting for Tuesday, July 17, 2018. Welcome. As always, this meeting is being video recorded. I thought we'd begin our meeting with a moment of silence in the memory of Weymouth Police Officer Michael Chestnut, who was killed in the line of duty on Sunday. Thank you. All right, so we have no appointments with outside folks, so we can get right into our discussion items. Thank you, Christine, for holding these matters for this evening so we can get through them rather than having them constantly pushed back. So we have 5 things on the list: annual appointments, the financial policy, town administrator search process, the Board of Selectmen goals, and Medfield State Hospital. I don't know that there's a rhyme or reason to the ordering of them under discussion items. Peter, Gus, do you have a preference as to the order in which we tackle them?
Oh.
Okay.
No.
Well, then let's start with annual appointments, as both words begin with A. And those can go first. So we have the accumulation of information here that we had first looked at on our meeting on June 26th. And so, just going through, if we could look at this sheet here, the 2018-2019 committee appointments.
Yes,
I thought the first thing we ought to do is go through and determine which committees are not going to be reappointed.
Yep, I did divide it. You have Exhibit A committees and Exhibit B committees.
Okay.
Just so you,
Okay.
and the Exhibit B are the ones that are statutorily in place, so you're not going to eliminate those.
All right. So starting with the Affordable Housing Committee, we have a questionnaire answer from the committee and Steve Nolan. And I think their initial response is that we should consider whether this committee should continue to exist. My view is that it probably shouldn't.
Agreed.
I think of the current committee members, I think Ann is the only one who wants it to continue. I think a lot of the work of the committee has been taken up now by the Board of the Affordable Housing Trust. Steve notes there's a few things we ought to do in advance of that, including changing the board of the Community Development Corporation and getting DHCD to recognize the Affordable Housing Trust Board as the local approving body.
I talked to Steve and I talked to Sarah about this. We cannot eliminate the Affordable Housing Committee until they have their final meeting and transfer the money.
Okay.
And Sarah already talked to DHCD, and she said a simple letter from the Board of Selectmen saying this is now the committee that will handle all of the 40B lit projects is fine. They said there was no formal procedure that needs to be done.
Okay. Discussion. Gus, repeat.
Seems fine to me.
Okay. I think we got to do it, and I don't know, when does Evelyn get back?
Monday.
I think for any of the committees we eliminate, or any people who are leaving the committees, I think we should send a letter to the members and thank them for their service on the committee and appreciation of the time they put in. For our Affordable Housing Committee member, some of those folks have been on there for a while, have done a lot of good for the town in that position. So if that could be an assignment for Evelyn, when she gets back to draft up an individual letter, I think the 3 of us can sign it at some future meeting.
And I think that should be a policy for any member that's
agree.
resigning from a committee, leaving a committee, that we send them a letter to thank them.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I can suggest some verbiage or whatever. to
Sure.
Evelyn when she gets back, and everyone can type them up and we can sign them. But I think if you could let Steve and Ann and those folks know, Christine, that we'll take the recommendation to shift the mandate to the Affordable Housing Trust Board of Trustees. And
Once
then
they have their final
once they have their final
final
meeting,
meetings, I'll get them to schedule that.
Right, and they want to keep the Community Development Corporation active. We want to keep that in existence. So that may be.
The board members of the Community Development Corporation are the members of the Affordable Housing Committee. Steve's indicated the Community Development Corporation may not want to be active anymore, since he's resigning.
No, but I'm suggesting we should probably replace that board with members of the Affordable Housing Trust Board,
Okay.
I would think, because I think there may be a utility to the CDC. going forward. The money will be transferred from the CDC to the Affordable Housing Trust, correct? But I think we may want to use the CDHC at some point in the future.
Okay,
Because there's more, if there's going to be town-sponsored developments, that it's more flexible.
correct.
It's done by
Let
the
me
CDC.
talk to Steve and get his recommendation on that.
Yeah, if it can go away and be revived, that's fine.
No, I think that he says it should be kept.
Yeah, I think it should be kept. I
Okay.
think that was what he said as well. So, I think we will be pending their final meeting and the transfer of that, we will not be reappointing this committee. And I don't know if we need a formal motion of dissolution. Probably would be useful for the record to have a formal motion of dissolution. They take effect after their final meeting. So do we have a motion from the clerk?
I move that we dissolve the Affordable Housing Committee once the remaining recommended actions to close out the business of the committee has been completed, and to transfer any ongoing responsibilities that are still relevant to the Affordable Housing Trust.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. The ALS Study Committee.
I would recommend that we discontinue that.
We can turn it into the ALS Permanent Debating Society.
No, we already have that. It doesn't require formal town sponsorship.
All right. All right, do we have a motion with respect to the ALS Study Committee?
I move that we discontinue or dissolve the ALS Study Committee with the town's gratitude for all the hard work that they did, but now having reached the decision to create the ALS capability, their responsibilities are no longer needed.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And so Christine, you have the 3 letters to themselves.
Yes.
For the Bay Colony Rail Trail, I think where we left it in our last discussion with Christian is that some sort of a committee is necessary, and it should have a different name from the Bay Colony Rail Trail Study Committee. I couldn't think of anything better than the Bay Colony Rail Trail Advisory Committee, but if there's another name for it, I'm happy to use it. Did we get any indication they did not respond to the questionnaire, but it sounded from Christian like the members would be interested in being reappointed.
I think so, although I thought Christian mentioned that he might have conflicting, it wasn't clear to me that he wanted to continue, but he didn't say he didn't, he just didn't confirm that he did, so.
I think he's trying to not be the chair of the group.
Well, I mean, I'd be inclined, I mean, he can always resign.
You know, one thing we could do is reappoint this committee, and then if Christian decides he wants to resign, we can do it.
Give it to
and
somebody
then
else.
Just reappoint it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're
rename
gonna
it
reappoint.
the Bay Colony Rail Trail Advisory Committee.
Yep.
And we'll do a motion to reappoint Christian, Eric, Graham, Robert, and George Hinckley.
I move that we reappoint the 5 existing current members of the Bay Colony Rail Trail Study Committee, and for the year going forward, change the name to the Bay Colony Rail Trail Advisory Committee.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Capital Budget Committee. This committee needs to continue existing, and Barbara will have to be replaced by a vote of the warrant committee. Otherwise, any reason not to reappoint everybody else?
Everybody else would like, has indicated they want to be reappointed.
I move that we reappoint the Capital Budget Committee, reappoint all the current members except for Barbara Gips, who has resigned from the Warrant Committee, replacement member of this committee to be designated by the Warrant Committee.
Second.
All in favor?
Yep. Aye.
Cemetery Commissioners.
I talked to Mo about this, and they would all like to be reappointed at this point.
Is Paul Hogan, is he an associate member as well, or is he a full member?
Paul is an associate, I'm sorry, it should say associate on there.
So we've got IFL, Sweeney,
Mhm.
and 3-year terms?
3-year terms except for the associates.
No 1-year terms?
So you're only you're reappointing Frank to a 3-year term, and then the 2 associates.
Okay. Ready?
Well, so only Frank, right? Because the others are still,
The associates have to be reappointed every year. Yeah,
so just Frank.
yeah, just Frank and the associates. Yeah.
Say that again, I missed the part, not Paul?
No, just Frank. His term's up in 2018,
So
and
is
then
Paul's.
Paul and David Temple.
Okay.
Yep. Sorry.
David Temple's 1 year as an associate, so he's reappointed 2019. The other 2 are till 2021. Yes?
No, isn't Paul?
Paul is an associate as well. I'm sorry.
Oh,
It should say
okay.
associate on there.
Okay, got it. Okay. All right. I move that we reappoint all of the cemetery commissioners whose term is about to expire, with Frank Iafola's term being extended for 3 more years to 2021, and David Temple and Paul Hogan as associate members being extended to 2019.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, the collective bargaining committee, I think we will need this year, correct?
Yes.
With the contract coming up. So obviously we should replace Chief Hollingshead with Chief Carrico.
Correct.
And probably shouldn't appoint Bob Meany because he won't be chief.
No, by the time we get back to bargaining, he wouldn't be chief anymore, so I would not reappoint him.
How about Tom Marie?
No, if Tom is going off the warrant committee, then you would need a warrant committee designee.
So we can appoint Peter Gus, unless either of you want to take the selectman position in the collective bargaining committee?
You're on a roll.
I have a question on some of these committees as to whether or not you want to do staggered terms on them and do them for 3-year appointments, or you want to reappoint everybody annually.
You mean for collective bargaining?
Yeah.
Do we need to do collective bargaining every year?
There are issues that come up. There could be grievances or issues that come up that you would need to do it. So I didn't know if you wanted to just stagger some of the terms. You weren't reappointing everybody every year.
Well, we could,
To me, it doesn't feel like it's a bad thing to appoint them all every year. But the reason I say that is, unlike a committee that's got an ongoing responsibility, this feels almost like this kind of search committee thing, where you do it, and it's a team that comes in to do it, and you might have people swap in and out from year to year, but it's not exactly a term you're signing up for. You're signing up for a job, I think, that's on the table. That'd be like, not hung up on it, though. It's,
I think, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think this does feel more like a one-year
Okay.
committee. So it would be myself, Chief Carrico,
Carrico.
Bob Conlon, and Christine. We'll need a warrant committee representative.
okay.
And then when the police chief is appointed, we'll have to appoint the police chief to it as well.
So I move that we reappoint Selectman Marcucci, Robert Conlon, Christine Trioweiler to the Collective Bargaining Committee. We newly appoint Chief Carrico to replace Chief Hollingshead. We defer appointment of a replacement for Tom Marie pending submission of a candidate by the Warrant Committee. And we defer appointment of the police chief until we have a police chief on board.
Second?
All in favor?
Yep.
Right, the committee to study memorials.
I talked to John Cogan, who's the veterans agent, and he would like to be appointed to this committee, and he would like to work with them to determine, he didn't have a chance to do their questionnaire with them. It's kind of new to him, just being from Medfield. So if you could appoint him, everybody else on the committee, then he'll work with them.
Does Ron Griffin stay or not?
No,
Okay.
So John Cogan will succeed Ron Griffin,
correct.
and Jane, David, and Michelle will stay on.
Mm-hmm.
So I move that we reappoint the three, Jane Lomax, David Temple, Michelle Doucette, to the Committee to Study Memorials, and newly appoint John Cogan to replace Ron Griffin.
Second?
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
Community Preservation Study Committee, I think we should terminate this committee. It came up at town meeting this year, it was not adopted. I think probably the study is over for now. And then we can have Evelyn draft letters of thanks to, we should have a letter for David Temple too. I know he's, not David Temple, Dan Bible.
Dan Bible.
Okay, I move that we dissolve the Community Preservation Study Committee, issuing letters of thanks to the existing 4 members, along with Dan Biden.
Second.
Did you say? Biden.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Council on Aging, it looks like Michael Clancy and Rich Ryder need to be reappointed.
Correct.
I assume they want to be.
They want to be.
I move that we reappoint Richard Ryder and Michael Clancy to a new 3-year term on the Council of Aging, on Aging.
Second?
All in favor?
Yep.
The Economic Development Commission.
They've requested to be disbanded.
Can I just ask a general question around here? It seemed to me that, as I recall, Gene Minio talked about the Basically, I think she started out by talking about where the Pocket Park would go. We've got an Economic Development Council that wants to be disbanded, and do we also, it felt like every one of the downtown economic committees wanted to discontinue. We may go along with that for now in dissolving that, but I'd make the observation that it appears we don't have any advocates for our downtown economic development. If we do that, we ought to think about.
I think Jean's position was a little more nuanced than that, or maybe I just had some communication with her outside of the meeting where I think she's somewhat interested, but she wanted a better definition from us as to what we were looking for with respect to the downtown. I mean, I think we need to have somebody looking at
Yeah.
what should happen in the downtown and making recommendations.
That was my point, yeah. We may go along with dissolving all of this, but it feels like there's a gap there.
Right, so I had this in my goals.
Okay.
That I think whether this becomes part of the master planning committee or separately, I think my sense of it is we need a more focused look at something in
Yeah,
downtown.
yeah.
And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I think that this committee's petering out a little bit, that they don't, that we need to have kind of a more direction from us to a committee. And then with more focus, we'll probably get kind of a, more developed kind of work product. So I'm okay with dissolving it with the idea that one of the things we've got to work on is what's going to replace it.
Just again, not to get to a decision, the one thing I wonder about is whether that committee should have a sole focus of economic development. Only because it seems like the economic development committees are suggesting that they be dissolved. But I'm reflecting a little bit on the comments, not just from the businesses downtown, but also from the people who live in the downtown area who have views about development, who have views about sidewalks, and whether that committee might almost be more effective as a broader-based committee that's geared toward making the downtown vibrant. But in order to do that, you need to bring economic development, traffic control, sidewalks, preservation of the character of the community at the same time that you're promoting redevelopment of property. That's just something to think about. Maybe that's that provides a lot of people who live in downtown with a forum to talk about the things they care about. Okay.
And the charrette type of thing that Sarah shared with Chris, that Chris shared with us, seemed like a good start to get something moving that at a low price. That was sort of a free thing that we could bring people into town who would focus on the downtown. I thought that was something we should follow up on. But the problem is if we dissolve our committees, then we won't have anybody to come to our meeting.
We can seek new members.
And we can probably think of things that we could do that would get the downtown people mad at us to show up. If
Get them to
attendance
show
is
up,
the
yeah.
goal,
Yeah.
we could probably figure that one out.
Do we have
And with a
motion?
week's notice, Pete, I can come up with several ideas. I just need them.
Gus, just make it about dogs and we'll get
Yeah,
plenty of people.
right. Cats have been underrepresented in our discussions, to be honest with you. So I recommend,
All cats require rabies shots from now on.
and licenses,
A leash law for cats.
a leash law for cats.
Man,
and-
are we
and-
gonna get
and,
a full house?
Yes, there we go. Okay, I move that we dissolve the Economic Development Commission.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The Elderly Taxation Aid Committee.
They need to be in place. They meet on an as-needed basis. But I did speak to Georgia Clevis, who's the chair, and she recommended that Yvonne Remillard, who's the assessor, replace Frank Perry on the committee.
And they do not have to be residents of Medfield?
No,
This committee? Okay.
they have not.
So,
That's not been the policy in the past
Okay,
for
no,
this
that's
committee,
fine.
but it's,
that's fine.
And I assume Yvonne is on board with that.
yes.
Okay. These 3-year terms, 1-year terms, or
These are one-year terms.
1-year terms? Okay. I move that we renew the 3 existing members of the Elderly Taxation Aid Committee and replace Frank Perry with Yvonne Remillard, all with 1-year terms through 2019.
Second.
All in favor?
Yep.
All right. The Emergency Management Agency.
I talked to the chief today. He would recommends that this stay in place for now, but there are ongoing discussions with the new fire chief that it may be more appropriate in the near future for the fire chief to take over the Emergency Management Agency.
Okay.
And the only recommendation at this point is to appoint Chris Canny, who's your new building commissioner, to replace John Neff.
Okay. I move that we reappoint the members of the Emergency Management Agency, replacing John Naff with Chris Canny.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
And these are all one-year appointments as well.
1 year.
The Employees Insurance Advisory Committee.
They are still working on their questionnaire, but they have indicated, other than John Wilhelmy, they are all interested in continuing to serve.
Do we need a replacement representative from the police union?
The police have not suggested one. There's currently a member on the police, so they seem to be fine with that.
Oh, Michelle.
Yeah, Michelle's on it.
All right.
So I move that we reappoint 7 members of the Employees Insurance Advisory Committee, dropping John Wilhelmy, leaving total current staffing of the committee at 7.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Yep. All right. We have a motion to disband the Fire Chief Selection Committee.
I move that we disband the Fire Chief Selection Committee.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Our Historical Commission, it looks like we have 2 full members to be reappointed and 6 associate members.
I move that we reappoint Anselin Wolf and William Hesperides as full members to 3-year terms out through 2021. And associates again are 1-year terms. Okay, and reappoint Robert Gregg, David Scharf, Michael Taylor, John Thompson, Mark Eames, and Cheryl O'Malley as associate members to a 1-year term through 2019.
Second?
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
The Kingsbury Pond Committee.
Mike Sullivan told me they are all interested in still serving on the committee.
Didn't Michael
not- I-
Thompson resign?
Uh,
For some reason, I think he resigned.
I'd have to look at
Yeah,
that.
well,
Let me look. I may have missed him.
why didn't I thinking that? Because I think I read it in the minutes that I was reviewing at lunchtime today.
Oh, it may have been recent, and I had done this before. That may have happened. That could be. I'll double check on that.
And there's a note here to move to 3 years.
Mike and I had talked about whether or not they should be a 3-year committee,
Mhm.
but again, it's
It makes sense to me that they might, given what it is, but then I would think you still want staggered, then you want staggered
we
membership.
want staggered so that we
So
keep
you'd
some
have to figure out
knowledge.
who's the 3, who's the 2, and who's the 1. So maybe we should just reappoint them all for 1 year with the stipulation that we're open to moving toward a 3-year staggered structure, and they can come with a revised request if they have a recommendation on how they'd like to do that.
It's fine with me.
Okay.
Second?
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
The Lyme Disease Study Committee, they want to change their name to the Deer Management Committee, and I think Chris Caldy wants off.
Correct.
Oh. Any reason we shouldn't take this one to a 3-year term? I
I-
think this should be a 3-year term. I mean, this is sort of a, it's kind of an opportunity, but it's,
So- So the other piece here is that it's interesting. I think Chris originally had suggested it be changed to a wildlife management committee as opposed to a deer management committee.
She emailed me deer management, but I think wildlife
I think
is.
wildlife is a better choice.
If we do wildlife, we could fold the beaver issue into them as well.
Well, and the other piece might be, this might be the group if we had, people get spun up on coyotes, and there's a lot of wildlife. I don't
Perfect.
know what the wildlife was that was screaming outside our basement window last night around 10:30, but there's a lot of wildlife around that,
then we'll probably have to change the next committee name to the Domestic Animal Control. Distinguish it from the Wildlife Management Committee.
Wild animal and domestic, okay.
let's do, so I would agree going to 3-year. Do we want to do that now, or do we want to do the same thing that we just did with the Kingsbury?
I get the sense these folks are in this for the long haul.
So that they would, my point is, if they suddenly find out, well, if you're appointed for 3 years and you decide you don't want to do it, you resign, so, okay, reappointed 3-year terms, and just four, or just the four? Okay. I move,
Three and then
The
an ex
other-
officio.
Yeah.
The other, I mean,
three,
Lesser
yeah.
Hartman really has nothing to do with the committee any longer.
No, and he was just the educational piece of it, and that's the piece that they're getting rid of, so I wouldn't reappoint him.
okay,
And
so,
he wanted the town of Medfield to have it in the first instance, but he never has been to a meeting. And the person who has been very active is Barry Mandel, and I don't know if Barry wants to be.
I don't know if he officially wants to be on the committee,
Okay, all right.
and I think we actually need to keep him off the committee.
Okay, yeah, as I think
Yeah.
about it, yep.
okay. I move that we reappoint Frank Perry, Nancy Schemer, and John Newell Jr. to three-year terms out through 2021, and redesignate the Lyme Disease Study Committee as the Wildlife Management Committee.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Yep.
All right. The Medfield Animal Control Study Committee.
I did not hear back from John Thompson if they still wanted to be involved. This was the group that was put in place to look at the leash and dog bylaw that we just passed at town meeting this past year. So I would leave them for this year, where we still have some issues at the state hospital with the dogs.
They've got more work to do, I think, so.
I think so. Yeah, I think that was just the first step.
Okay. So I guess we'll
So
reappoint.
I move that we reappoint all members of the Medfield Animal Control Study Committee for another year, out through 2019.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
At the Medfield Cultural Council, we have 4 members to be reappointed to 3-year terms.
I move that we reappoint Claire Shaw, Liz Daly, William Pope, and Susan Parker to 3-year terms out through 2021 on the Medfield Cultural Council.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Medfield Energy Committee, we could probably take Jerry McCarty off there as an ex officio
Yes.
member. Otherwise, Pete, does everybody want back on it?
I think so. Let me
Yes, and
just
I
look
think
and see.
Lee and Linsky finished his annual questionnaire as well. That was in there, so I believe they all want to be reappointed.
Magic, whose last name I can't pronounce, Magic's, he moved to Dover, so
Okay.
we probably shouldn't reappoint him. And he stopped coming. I told him he could keep coming to the meetings, but he hasn't been for
Okay.
the year that he's been away.
So you
So everybody
want,
but
so we
those
should
two.
drop him, Pete?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. And then it says over here, make it a 3-year term. Are we,
That was most of these were just questions as to whether or not they should be 3-year terms.
again, maybe again, the same thing, we do a staggered, do a 1-year term with the stipulation that they can come back in with how they would like to configure a 3-year staggered? Yeah, okay. I move that we reappoint Leah Linsky, Penny Connor, Paul Fechtelkotter, Fred Davis, Cynthia Green, Marie Nolan, David Temple, Michael those as official members of the Medfield Energy Committee, reappointed to 1-year term with the stipulation that they can come back in with a recommendation for how to stagger to convert to a 3-year term. Also move that we reappoint Michael Sullivan and Osler Peterson as ex officio members for another year on the Medfield Energy Committee.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Memorial Day Committee.
They would very much like to be in place, and Evelyn said 1-year terms, not 3 years.
And it's all of them. Chief Meany's gonna, yeah, I guess he'd probably be willing to do that.
I think he would like to remain on it for now.
Okay. And it looks like I'm on it too. I didn't know that. I'm willing to be on it. I feel guilty about having missed the Memorial Day Parade this year, but
Did you miss the committee meetings too?
I did. Yeah, I
only
not
have
only
2.
wasn't aware I was on it, but apparently nobody wanted me there anyway, with my reputation for how long I can drag meetings out. Okay, I recommend that we reappoint Lori Gwendon, Robert Meany, Albert Manganello, William Mann, Ann Thompson, Gustav Murby, Michelle Doucette, Ronald Griffin, Evelyn Clark, Frank Iafolla to 1-year terms on the Memorial Day Committee.
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye, and I just noticed that's another 3-year term. Is that the committee's asking for this, or is this you
They
just?
want a 1-year term.
They only want 1 year.
Okay, so that-
I was making recommendations on some, but Evelyn
Okay.
vetoed the 3-year term.
I got it, okay, thank you.
The
OPEB trust,
Fund.
I move that we reappoint the 5 members of the current OPEB trust fund.
Second.
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
Open Space and Recreation Committee.
They are working on their questionnaire, and it will be submitted when Conservation completes theirs.
Okay.
I believe they are still doing work on the open space plan, so they need to be reappointed for this year at least.
So we appoint those, not the Concom?
Leslie says the Board of Selectmen appoint them.
Okay.
I will double check that for you.
The latest update on their plan, I think, is due with the next Conservation Commission meeting.
Yeah, they've had to do some updates on it.
So I recommend that we reappoint the 5 members, current members of the Open Space and Recreation Committee to a 1-year term out through 2019.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, Pocket Park Steering Committee. I think this is, we're gonna dissolve this committee.
Correct.
Recommend that we dissolve the Pocket Park Steering, before we do that, we may dissolve them anyway, but there's a loose end here around who's responsible for the Pocket Park going forward.
I talked to Jean Minnie about that. They're going to submit any invoices for the maintenance, everything to my office, and we'll take care of processing that. And then DPW does some work, as well as Garden Continuum on the park. So we should be all set.
The DPW acknowledges that responsibility.
A little bit. Yes.
And the people on this committee are not gonna let go of it either. I mean, they feel ownership of that park
Correct.
at this point, so
Yeah.
as long as they're around, I think we're covered. But for the long
It
term.
would be
we
a
need-
self-organizing committee that can move ahead without the sponsorship of the Board of Selectmen.
Right,
That's
but
it.
your point is good, that for the long term, somebody needs to be responsible in the town
Right.
government.
Right,
And I
Right.
promise to keep paying the bills.
yeah.
So Christine's responsible then.
Okay, I move that we dissolve the Pocket Park Steering Committee, transfer the ongoing maintenance responsibilities to a combination of the DPW and other volunteers who are willing to carry the work forward.
Second?
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
Safety Committee.
I talked to Chief Meany, and he thinks that they should stay in existence. They consider any sort of requests for stop signs or sidewalk issues you've been sending to them, so they would like to stay.
Now, that one sounds to me like something that maybe should be more than a 1-year term. Because there could be discussion, I'm thinking about, especially we're talking stop signs, and we're probably gonna be talking about speed bumps. Those are conversations that sometimes go on for years. Does it make sense to up it to a 3-year term?
That makes sense to me.
Okay, I move that we reappoint the 4 current members of the Safety Committee to 3-year terms out through 2021.
Second?
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
The Senior Housing Study Committee would like to be disbanded.
Correct.
So, they were created originally by a town meeting article, but they were appointed by us, so I think we could just disband them.
You can disband them.
Is there anything the Senior Housing Committee does that needs to be picked up, presumably, I guess, by the Affordable Housing Trust? Is there anything they're doing that needs to be carried on?
I think anything that they're doing has already been transferred to the Affordable Housing Trust, so I think we're
Okay.
we're
And
okay.
I suspect we'll continue to hear from their members.
Well,
Yes. And I did talk
yeah.
to Tony this week, and Tony said, please disband us.
So the thing I want to make sure is that is because they feel like their job is done and not because they feel like nobody listens to them anyway.
No, I think, my understanding, my interaction with him was because their report had been finalized, it had presented, they had reached the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
I move that we dissolve the Senior Housing Study Committee.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So for the State Hospital Buildings and Grounds, I thought the note on the 3-year term for this one made sense, but we should probably appoint Chief Carrico to replace Chief Hollingshead.
Correct.
That slot. I think we can keep Chief Meany on for now, and maybe he'll resign and be replaced by his successor, but
Okay.
I think a 3-year term makes sense for this one.
Okay.
Or a lifetime appointment for John Thompson.
Yeah. Right. Okay. I move that we reappoint John Thompson, Robert Meany, Paul Hinckley, Maurice Goulet, and Christine Trierweiler to 3-year terms on the State Hospital Building and Grounds Committee, and replace Chief Hollingshead with Chief Carrico as a new member, also for a 3-year term out through 2021.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
The State Hospital Environmental Review Committee.
Shirk.
Bill, do you have a view on this committee? Whether there's still work for them to do?
I guess it depends on what happens with the other.
I know. Yeah, at this point,
Sure hasn't,
they haven't had to meet on anything.
I would almost be tempted to leave them there for when the final report on the remediation.
Right.
Comes up.
Correct.
Yeah.
They haven't met in a while.
They haven't met in a while, and they deferred a lot of their work to the negotiating committee. But I don't think it hurts at this point to leave them there just in case there is an issue that comes up.
Bill, you have a sense of how long that monitoring is going to take place?
We're working on it.
Well,
Now, what's behind it is this should this also be a 3-year term? That's all.
I would do a 1 year on this.
Yeah,
Well,
one should be.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me put it this way, it's gonna be 1 or 2, or it's gonna be never. You know, at the
You
risk
might
of-
want to use the microphone there, Bill.
well, how much negativity can I send over the airwaves?
Well, I mean, something else. In-person crowd is light
It's
tonight.
it's light. We need you to do a little more of the heavy lifting tonight there, Bill.
The issue still remains that they have not been able to successfully remediate the plume that's originating at the laundry parcel. The original plan was they thought that they would be done in 2 years. We have a condition in the agreements that say that they will have 2 years of clean water testing. They, to my knowledge, and we still haven't seen all of the reports, the last set of reports, they have not attained the clean water, the 2 years.
Bill, do we have any idea why that is? Because isn't it just a question of pumping oxygen into the ground?
It is, but again, I keep telling everybody I was an English major, so I have to study these things to come up with a reasonable, intelligent answer. But my understanding is that because of the nature of the soils, the amount of groundwater that's there, it's impacted the speed with which the remediation could be carried out. In other words, there's not enough groundwater typically up there to carry the stuff down through into the plume and speed the remediation along. That's my layman's understanding of what the issue is. We're trying to get a meeting going again to go over. We have a couple of other issues up there they still owe us an activity and use limitation on the area up there. We have a draft, but that still was pending, again, completion of the plume. So we're trying to get a meeting together. You know that DCAM's had some changes in personnel, so I think that they're struggling with reappointments and trying to get everybody together too. So we'll keep you informed.
So if they can't remediate it, then that probably means that piece of property doesn't get transferred to the town.
That's correct.
And, okay.
Again, it was as part of the land disposition agreement. It was totally separate.
Yeah.
And all of the terms and conditions that apply to the main piece of property were also called out separately to the laundry parcel. So, I mean, it's not going to impact anything up at the, with the rest of the property. And it's about, I want to say like 0.9 acres. So it's less than an acre. It's a desirable piece of property. It's the closest probably to overlooking the river and everything else. But still, if you can't get it down to where it meets basically, residential the groundwater, can't get it down to a residential standard and everything else, and you're not going to build on it anyway. So.
Well, that's where I was thinking. I don't think that's a critical issue with the state hospital master plan. It might be a nice piece of property to have for purposes of developing something, but it probably, A, doesn't stop anything else in the master plan from taking place, and B, doesn't present itself as a major environmental issue that would detract from the value of the property we do have.
No, and again, it's not something that's, it's not something readily apparent. It's something you'd have to dig down to find and everything else. And again, with some kind of a use limitation, activity limitation on it, it'd be all right. As far as the master plan goes, the current version was calling for the construction of some high-end condos there. I don't know how that plays into the financials, you know, for the whole rest of the property, you know, for a developer or anything else, whether that high end was important now. But my thoughts were, again, was that it was towards the end of the process as well,
It
so.
was, yeah, I think it was, okay. Okay, I recommend that we reappoint the 4 current members of the State Hospital Environmental Review Committee to another one-year term out through 2019.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. State Hospital Master Planning Committee. Seems like they got at
That's
least
where-
reappointed through any town meeting, right?
No, I think we dissolve them and we create a development committee.
I think that they're needed through the special town meeting, so I would reappoint them.
I think you'll wind up adding, it's not clear to me why we need to have the master planning committee continue when we need a development committee, and we'll wind up with 2 committees. And the idea that we're gonna keep the master planning committee out through the special town meeting, what does that mean for the development committee? Are we gonna have one, or are we gonna defer it for a year?
I would have created a development committee 3 months ago, but, I mean, I think they have 2 different mandates.
I actually don't think they do. I think that when we get to the special town meeting, we need to have a sanity check from a market economic standpoint, and that's what the development committee needs to do. I think it's fine to have a connection back to the members, a member or some number of members of the master planning committee who can carry the corporate knowledge into the development committee, but I think it's a complete mistake to have 2 committees working in parallel.
Well, I mean, right now, we don't have a second committee.
That's
We've not
right.
created a
That's
second
right.
committee, we've not
So
made, other than.
that should be the
talking
first
about
order
it.
of business, not keeping the old committee.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't think we should create a development committee to check the work of the State Hospital Master Planning Committee. We should create a development committee to implement and move forward on development of the property, not to do more research and modify the master plan.
The master plan by itself right now has not been vetted from a market standpoint. We have very marginal financial data. The master planning committee, at the level that the cost estimates have been developed, is suggesting that there's a reasonable chance this could be economically attractive. And we have not validated that at all, which is the issue, that ties into the issue around the RFI and trying to bring actual developers in here to guide us. But the idea that we're going to go in with the master planning committee to the special town meeting with absolutely no verification or no confirmation that there's true interest on the part of developers, I think is a mistake, because I don't think that that plan by itself will hold up. I'm not trying to redesign the entire master plan, I'm not suggesting we start from scratch, but the glaring deficiency that we have there is we have not yet connected it to marketplace reality. And if we can't do that to go into that special town meeting, then basically we could be approving zoning based on a plan which then we find out has a lot of flaws in terms of actually connecting economically. If the issue is we don't have that development committee, I agree. I was talking about this last summer, that we needed one, and we haven't really talked about it. But the point is, when are we going to form that development committee?
Pete?
I think that I would have the master planning committee vet the process through the special town meeting.
Okay,
they're
what
the
does
ones
vetting
with-
the process mean?
Well, I think they're the ones that need to be leading the process. It's their master plan. The master plan is basically just housing, with more commercial than most people think is feasible at the site. It's different varieties of housing, and it really isn't until we get out to the market that we're gonna get some sort of response of, what we need is a very flexible plan,
Which we have.
that the market will tell us what they want and what they don't want. And we can always make the plan more financially feasible by adding density to it. I mean, that's apparently what the market wants, is more units. And so so there'll be that trade-off for the residents in town to decide how many units do you want versus the impact on your taxes. And it can be made more or less profitable for the town through the return on the property taxes that the town gets in the long run by the number of units of density. And so, you know, the town's got a lot of decisions to make about this. None of us per se like the idea of a lot of density, but, you know, most of us like the idea of our property taxes going down. So we're gonna have to make a choice and figure out where to draw the line. But I think, you know, if you talk about those Monte Carlo analysis, and I think that's what you're talking about, that their analyses showed that it wasn't always appealing to the developer. Well, you can move those needles by adding some density, which is the one variable that we have as a town that we can do.
First, so I disagree with that point about it being primarily housing, but quite aside from that, if the message coming from us is that, well, we'll just move the needle by whatever density we need to make this thing profitable, do not expect this master plan to be passed by the town. Because that basically, the state thought they needed 440 units. I've heard people project that actually in order to be profitable, you need 600 to 800 units. And so if we're walking into this saying, we're going to be blind, we want you to approve the plan, and then we'll go out to the marketplace and they'll tell us what the number needs to be, I think that's, I'm not even sure that I would vote for that.
Well, I think the town needs to know the number, yeah.
Well, in order to do that, you
Town's not
need
gonna
to,
write
you
a
need,
blank check.
which I do agree with that, which says we need to start talking turkey with developers, and we need people who actually, I think on our side of the town, of the equation, we need people who know how to talk to real estate developers, who can bring those real estate developers in to have the hard discussions that if there's hard messages that we need to know about, we need to know about them before the special town meeting, not go through a special town meeting, approve a master plan, approve zoning, and then get an unpleasant message in the following year when the people who really are working on developing the property finally get down to talking to developers.
I mean, I basically agree with a lot of what you're saying, Gus. I think that I would like that sort of gut check of, from the professional development community as to whether we've got something that's really workable, saleable, doable. I think that the master planning committee has tried to do that. I think they've got people that are, Kathy McCabe, I think, is some sort of real estate professional.
She's an engineer. She's not, no, I don't think.
Well, she works in the real estate development area, and my understanding from them is that they feel like they've talked to the development community. I know they did that roundtable in 2015. And I don't know, I don't understand their model, but, certainly their model seems to indicate that things are workable. We know that VHB had it being a lot more units to be a break even for the town. They were up in that 600 to 800 unit category if the town was going to break even, but that might have included that 25 million of infrastructure, I'm sure, that we're talking about now as to how to get accomplished.
Pete, if I look at the master planning committee, first off, I think they had upfront discussions with some developers. You're right. I don't think they really had in-depth upfront discussions with master developers, for example, that could take a look at the entire project. I think they looked at developers that were interested in parts of the project, and some of that was useful, and I think a lot of that, including even the work that VHB did, basically said coming in from the market side of this, the unit count has to go up. And so I think what the master planning committee tried to do is to thread a needle, and I applaud them for this, I'm not criticizing them. They tried to thread a needle that says we're going to try to come up with a concept that stays within bounds of what the town would feel comfortable doing, that doesn't necessarily look to maximize the economic return, but does try to capture a lot of things the town cares about. And that's the plan, which I'll call aspirational, but I don't mean to like discount it. I'm just saying this is the picture that was the best picture the master planning committee could form of what the town would like to see. There's now a step here where we're going to have to go to the real world, to real developers, and say, this is the thing we want. We would like you to tell us what you can do that will get us as close to this as possible. And I think there's going to be some tough messages coming out on that. If I look at the master planning committee composition right now, Steve Nolan's probably the only person who's on that. And again, I'm not criticizing anybody on the committee, but Steve Nolan's probably the only, man still standing on that committee, person still standing on that committee that actually has the real estate development expertise. So, I'm pushing for, I'm saying, okay, here's the picture, this is the goal. We've got that. It is flexible. It would, I think, given their zoning strategy, it would, I think the zoning that we're trying to pass is something that can accommodate a lot of adjustment, but that adjustment, I think, needs to be made with a small group of people who are in town, who care about, what we care about, but have the in-depth real estate development expertise, who can have real in-depth discussions with prospective developers in order to start bringing people's feet to the ground so we know what we're dealing with. And I think that's something that should happen before the special town meeting.
And I agree with you, Gus, that it should happen before going to the special town meeting. I guess I'm just not sure that we appoint a development committee of volunteers and expect them to do it for us, or whether we go out and hire someone who's the professional in that area that'll do it for us.
I would suggest that,
When Steve was here and he talked about the, getting the zoning set and and how important that is for the developer, I mean, I knew that was a real important piece because he does this all the time. And so it's that sort of gut reaction, hearing that from Steve, that I found really invaluable. And I'd like that same sort of gut reaction from some other real estate professionals about our master plan.
So my suggestion on the development committee is that the first thing we do is not simply put an ad out for people who want to volunteer. I think that there are some, and I'm not the one who's known them. I've had some names that have been passed on to me, and of people here in town. The only one that I would say I know that's in that area is Chris McMahon, who came from Boston Realty Advisors, and I'm not putting him up necessarily on this committee, but there are.
They want to get hired to do this. They don't
Well, I mean, they didn't come to me as a marketing thing. They actually came to me through a personal contact, and just to be clear, they didn't come in to market a service. They came in to offer free advice. In the course of my talking with them, I said, can you tell me what, I know you guys aren't master developers, can you give me an idea of what you do? And so I easily set that part of the conversation up simply to find out what they could do. They're clearly not master developers, so if anything, they could be a company that I think could help us think this through from a process standpoint to get to a master developer. That's it.
And they said
but those aren't the people I'm thinking of.
They do RFIs. They help people do RFIs. So if we decided we want to do an RFI, apparently they could help us with that.
But I have gotten some names of people that are here in town, and I haven't actively gone out. They've just come into me about people who have real estate development. I think we actually might target and create a committee that has the people on it that we want, and ask them, maybe we have 8 people we ask and only 4 want to do it or 3 want to do it. But to try to actually target a group of people that have the expertise and ask them if they'd be willing to volunteer. It's not the way we usually do it, I know it, but this is somewhere between a $300 million and $500 million real estate development project. Just hiring somebody, A, I wouldn't know for sure who to pick, and B, I'm not sure that we wouldn't wind up with a VHB-like advisor that would basically tell us, your numbers are wrong. So if we could find friendly volunteers with the expertise that would be willing to do that.
Isn't that, though, in tension with the hard messages you want to hear from developers? I mean, to me, VHB gave us hard messages that we didn't want to hear, and so we fired VHB. And so,
or they fired us.
However, it worked out. And so
mutual parting of the ways, I think.
Mutual parting of the ways.
Yeah.
But I mean, they certainly were providing, from the development perspective, hard messages, right? That what the development wants. And one of my concerns about the RFI is that I'm going to be very surprised if it actually yields useful new information we didn't know, which is the best use of that property is residential housing. And that, the hard messages, if you ask developers, we've asked the town, what do you want to see up there? We've asked some developers, what would you like to see up there? If we ask another group of developers, what would you like to see up there? We're probably going to get the answer, well, housing. Housing's a great answer for up there. There's a lot of space. It's beautiful. Yeah. It's a town people want to live in. And so, I mean, if we want to get that.
Well, I think that's the wrong question. I think that's the wrong question. I basically think the question you ask developers is, here's a master plan here's what we want to see up there. What would you come in with that would address this? And we need to hear from you if there's pieces of this that are so unrealistic, it can't be done. But I mean, if all we're saying is, well, what bugs me is that this is a absolute beautiful piece of property, and we keep getting into conversations that says, well, the only thing you do up there is housing, which is a completely mechanical, non-thoughtful, non-imaginative way. We just do numbers. This many numbers, this price, this many acres, that's all there is to it. It's got nothing to do with where we're at, how it fits, how it connects with the history of the town. I think the master plan has actually done a decent job of making those connections, but the developers we want to talk to are not just what do you want to do up there. It's here's what we want to do up there. Tell us how you could do this.
And if the zoning is sufficiently flexible, why aren't the best answers we're going to get from that in response to an RFP to actually develop it as opposed to in response to an RFI?
Because I think there's some reality checks on what we put into that concept that we need to be aware of before we release an RFP. There's, purely speculative. We want to put the entire, to Pete's point about it's all housing, well, it's not, when the entire east side of the camp of the quad is being targeted for a continuing care facility. Or we might have somebody come in and say, that would have been a really great idea 5 years ago, but not anymore because you get these 5 facilities, the market is saturated. Or they might say, the market's saturated, but this place is so great, your concept isn't quite right. Make this thing better than any other facility around here, and let all the rest of them figure out how they're going to hold things together. Because this could be the preeminent. I don't know which way it would go.
But I guess if we've passed zoning that's flexible, that would allow any of those things, right?
Yeah.
And I've stated my view that I don't think we should be adding extra hurdles to the zoning process. We ought to zone the whole property as potentially available for development. Not that we want to develop the whole property, but that, to the point of being sufficiently flexible that a developer who has a more creative approach, for example, to the infrastructure, who might be able to figure out how to do it for less than $25 million, or have a different layout for it that might solve that problem. And so I just don't know that. My concern is that this RFI process just will become another planning process, and that the implementation committee, will become another planning process, right?
Yeah.
It'll essentially,
It is in
instead
some ways,
of
yeah.
a development committee that's going to have a mandate, because to me, my view of the development committee is they're going to decide, in the short term, what are we going to do with the buildings? How are we going to evaluate these RFPs? How are we going to go about this implementation part of this process in vetting these proposals, as opposed to issuing an RFI and then, potentially modifying the master. Right. I mean, obviously, if you get the feedback saying you've got to zone it differently, you'd adjust. I just don't know how much different.
I'm not worried about the zoning. So here is, I think, where you and I are departing. You're operating off an assumption that the master plan is what we're going to do. I think this is what I think you're saying. And so we're going to hire a development committee to simply implement the master plan.
No, I've already said I don't think the master plan can or should be implemented as it is. I mean, that's been my view for 4 months. It's still my view. And
So-
that spending money to try to implement the master plan is not a good use of money. To me, spending money to evaluate proposals within the zoning that's been adopted at a town meeting is a good use of the development committee's time, recognizing that what it ultimately looks like could be quite different than implementing. I don't think
So what
that the
guides
town
what
gets
guides
enough-
the development committee the way you're looking at it?
What's that?
When you have the development committee looking at these proposals, what's the question that they ask that the proposals are responding to?
Well, ultimately, I mean, how much is it going to cost the town? What's the
For
benefit
what?
to the town?
Well, for what?
What do you mean, for what's being proposed?
Well, no, we're chasing our tail. I'm saying that if the master plan is not laying out the blueprint for what these developers are proposing, what is it that the developers are proposing against
They're
that will be
proposing-
evaluated by the developers?
They're proposing against the zoning that's been adopted.
So we could have skipped 3 years of master planning and just gone to broad zoning. So here's where I think that falls apart. The townspeople are going to be asked to approve zoning. The zoning is flexible, which I'm totally in agreement with. But the backdrop for them to decide whether or not they want to approve zoning is a master plan that says this is what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
If the RFP goes out and says, hey, we've got 87 acres, 92 acres that are zoned for this flexible zoning. Tell us what you would do.
I misunderstood your question.
okay.
I mean, I think
Okay.
it is still going to be measured against the master plan, right? If the town has endorsed the master plan,
Mm-hmm.
you're still going to say, okay, here, how does it deviate from the master plan, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if you say the overall goal is, and as I said, I think the
Okay.
master plan should be shorter,
Mhm.
less prescriptive. It should say things like 40 acres of open space as opposed to open space in this spot versus that spot. But you know, no one else seems to think that. And that's fine. And so I would measure it against that. So you've come up with a proposal, developer. Developer A has proposed 850 housing units, measured against this master plan. Developer B has proposed X number of housing units, this kind of commercial, measured against the master plan. But in each of those situations, we're gonna be able to evaluate hard numbers as to those proposals. So the developer will come in with, here's how we propose to do it. I wanna buy these 45 acres, I wanna buy 90 acres, I wanna buy 60, I wanna buy 30, I wanna do the infrastructure this way, this is how I propose to finance it. So in other words, you know, for all these various financing structures that the master planning committee has suggested, developers will come in with one, right? So the developers want some, instead of stating up front. Where
So
it
you,
makes
you
sense-
see piecemealing this, multiple
not necessarily.
developers?
No. I think most likely. I'm concerned on the process for doing this. I mean, substantively, I'm very flexible, right? Other than I don't want any tax money spent on it, if possible, right? If possible, but depending what the proposal is, you know, you might be able to justify a little bit of it. It's more, how do we do it? Because to me, the obstacle is the perpetual state of planning the town has been in. And I do just worry that we will just be furthering the perpetual planning machine. Now, maybe that's what we have to do. Maybe the real point, Gus, that you haven't said yet, is that you just think this process has failed, and we need to do a different process. Then we should talk about that. I don't, you know.
Yeah, I don't think the process has failed, and actually, as I told the committee when they were here at our last meeting, when I read the master plan, I actually liked what the master plan, what happened is the committee pulled together all that they did and put it into a format that you could read, and it was more coherent and more thoughtful and more, you know, sensitive to a lot of issues than I actually thought they were capable of producing, having gone to individual meetings. And Pete, you might react to that as well, because you've been to probably as many as I have. But they actually had a coherent story. There's a picture there that has merit. I think where you and I are differing is one path is, okay, there's the concept. Now, let's form a committee, let's send out RFPs. Not sure how we're gonna figure out who to send those RFPs out to, but because there are strategic decisions, like, do you go to a master developer or not? I'm not quite sure how that would work, but let's send those RFPs out, we'll see what comes in. We'll either pick the best one that comes in, or we'll decide we don't like any of them, I guess. The one concern I have about what the Master Planning Committee has done is I don't believe the Master Planning Committee closed the economic loop with the development community. I understand they talked up front, and they got input, and they got told, oh, you gotta have lots of housing and all that. I'm not convinced, now that we know what it is we want, I think there's a step, and we have the time to do it if we choose to, which is to bring the kinds of developers we would send the RFP out to say, look, here's what we're planning to do, here's how it's expecting it to look, this is the thing we want to achieve. Can you give us a sanity check on this picture and tell us, is there anything we could do to change this without losing its spirit that would make this more likely to attract interest and to get us, you know, an economically less burdensome proposal than what we're worried about we're gonna see when we know that we're sitting on a $25 million unfunded infrastructure cost. That's the real thing that I'm trying to do. Now, you can go in blind and not do that up front, or we could move to do that prior to the special town meeting. And the main reason I care about that, well, there's two reasons. One is the economic reason, to make it more attractive for developers in hopes of getting better proposals. But the second is to be as candid with the taxpayers about what it is we actually are really trying to do and what we think we're going to wind up doing, so that when they decide whether or not to approve the zoning, they have more reason to have confidence in the picture, even though there'll probably be changes, but they have more reason to have confidence that that picture, in fact, does reflect what we really want to do. That's the difference. And the advice on RFIs has gone in both directions. In my case, most of the qualified real estate people I've talked to have said it's a good idea to go with an RFI, and it's not unreasonable. It's not like you won't get anybody to respond. There are developers who are willing to put that time in when they know you're serious about it. So I don't see it as something that necessarily delays the process, though, unless we take 4 months to decide to do it, and then we're in the fall, and then it does.
So you think we could do it before an October time?
Yeah, I would like to do it after we've formed a development committee, or whatever you want to call that, because if we don't, then the responsibility for assessing those inputs falls on our shoulders, and I don't think that the three of us collectively are the best place for that to fall. So, to me, the first step is getting that committee pulled together.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that entirely. I think, I'm still not, I don't think my view on the master plan has changed. I think I agree with you about the description of it. It is coherent. I don't think there's enough upside in it for the town, to make it worth a $25 or $28 million taxpayer contribution to it. I think you could probably cut that amount in half and do something different that gets more for the town in the long run. Obviously, there's the benefit of the plan. To me, the principal benefit of the plan is that it at least deals with the liability associated with owning the buildings. It resolves what's going to happen with the buildings. It avoids kind of the disaster scenario because you are moving, assuming it's implemented and assuming something happens with it, which is another concern I have, is I don't know that anyone's going to want to do that, right? I don't know that plan is something anybody's going to want to do. So I still favor a more incremental approach to it. At the same time, I'm not so wedded to that view that I want to hold up the process here. I think we have to, one of the goals that I've identified for us is to have a town meeting vote on Medfield State Hospital.
So could I just comment one point about the finance? And Pete, I invite you to confirm or disagree on this. The one point I think around your concern about the money that the town puts in, to the best of my knowledge, with what Kathy McCabe and the committee have pulled together, the issue has more to do with a cash flow question than an absolute net inflow. And what I mean by that is two pieces. One, out of that 25, or I think if you add some of the other non-infrastructure stuff in, it's all the way up to 28 million in Kathy's numbers. The first thing is there are opportunities to get state grants, so mass work grants. There's ways to chip away at that total number through grants with the state. And the second piece is whatever remains of it, there are it's a district improvement financing and TIF financing that basically would have the town putting money up front as the negative cash flow on the overall project sucks money up, which would then be paid for. It basically gets financed because you commit the downstream tax revenues to pay off that financing. So in terms of if we look with a 50-year horizon, we might say, yeah, this is something we could do without it costing the town anything. Now, I still get a little antsy because I think, depending on how you choose to finance it, there's a risk component to the project which the town is not out from under. Assuming the project all works great, then yes, this all sorts itself out. If the project doesn't work as well, then the town still is holding a bag. But at least the concept here suggests that there's a way to do this that does not permanently cost the town money. It costs the town money in the near term.
No, and I understand that. I think I'd be more comfortable relying on one of those financing mechanisms as part of a comprehensive agreement with the developer to do it.
So would I.
To what the developers, financing sources are, how viable it is, as opposed to going into it saying, well, the way we're going to make this work is by upfront saying whatever mechanism we choose, and the reality is that property will not be generating, to your point, cash flow.
Right.
And so if you look at the charts, you look at the graphs, all the upfront cost is on the town, and I think the graph gets positive for the first time in 2032, right? And so when they say it's cash flow positive from the town's perspective, it is, assuming all of the assumptions check out as to the net expenses associated with it, it's a long way off. And so it's a big upfront cost. And I just don't see, measured against what our goals are as a town, I don't see sufficient upside from the master plan as as devised to say, well, we really ought to be investing a lot of resources in trying to make it happen. I agree wholeheartedly that we do want, ultimately, if we're gonna develop that property and try to achieve something like the master plan, we need the input from developers. And my only question is, does the RFI get us enough to make it worth delaying potentially? Now, if we think we can do this, and I don't know if they've given it to us, I'd ask Chris when he was here if he could give us examples of RFIs and responses. I don't know if they've given us.
Yeah, I haven't sent anything. I can follow up on that.
But, I mean, I'm certainly open to doing that as an additional data point. But the reality is, depending on what comes back from it, it may, if it's sufficiently hard message, if we get the answers back in the middle of September, are we gonna say, you know what, we have this town meeting coming up, but, you know, we think this is too far off? And then you're sort of, and as we saw at this year's town meeting, I think the reservoir of patience that the people of Medfield have with this process has been sufficiently drawn down. Now, this town meeting, it's one night or 2 nights in April, there's a lot else going on. I think this got lost. I don't think there was a real deliberate rejection of any activity there. But the reality is, I think there is a certain amount of impatience with it. And so I'm cognizant of the fact that we don't have unlimited runway here. At some point, people are just gonna say they've heard enough about it. And
But I think that if you have a meeting in which people can actually provide some input and have some votes on some choices, I think that's what they're looking for, is to have some say and to.
For
to let
developers to do it, yeah.
Well, no, I'm thinking of the town meeting to, you know, that there is an interest both from the residents to respond to some suggestions from the town as to what's gonna happen. That the town is ready to give us some answers, I think.
You're talking about the special town meeting?
Yeah,
Pete?
special town meeting on the hospital. I think
So
that people are.
Would we
you know,
get a zoning?
They're tired of the planning process going on forever, and I think they're ready to start making some decisions. And so I think they're.
Well, so the only decision they actually have to make is to approve the zoning, though. The idea, they're not approving the master plan, they're kind of
They're
hearing.
effectively approving the master plan, yeah.
Yeah. What,
So let me back up and Mike, you started out by saying that you seem to be the lone person in going for flexibility. I like the flexibility too. And so I don't mind your statement of, you know, 40 acres, for instance, being open somewhere and letting the developer tell us which of the 40 acres. I mean, I'm very happy to suggest to them which ones we think are important for whatever reasons, and that's what the master plan has done. But I wouldn't tie the developers' hands. I'd give them ultimate flexibility and see what they come up with. And we might like what they come up with better than what we've thought of. I mean, that's one of the things that you see from the, as I said, I was looking back through the developer roundtable, and the people, well, I guess you're not supposed to tell who they are, but one of the developers of a very nice project in Massachusetts said that ultimate flexibility and the zoning and the implementation was what made it work.
So in an RFI process, I would be fine with that. In an RFP process, the issue, and from the time we first bought the property in my head, it's just in my head, but I basically jumped to an assumption that our development efforts would more or less remain within the current footprint of buildings. So part of the issue around flexibility around open space is, well, so if developers, presumably we're going to redevelop all the buildings that are there, we're going to replace the cottages. If I step back and said, if this was open land, would we put this many buildings down there? The answer is no. So we already have an issue of more buildings there than we actually want. Opening up the open space for developers, I'd at the very least want to be sure that the developers are redeveloping the current footprint. And then all I can see is open space, you know, developers suggesting, and I'm not talking about, this is the issue around like the Great Lawn. My reaction was, well, but there's a couple of little tabs up at the upper corners. If some developer said, you know, if you'd give me this chunk of what you're calling open space, you know, just this little thing right here, I could do something with it that would make a big difference on the whole development. That, to me, is the kind of open space flexibility that makes sense to me. The idea that some developer wants to develop the north pasture by putting another 120 units in there or houses in there because it's a great place for housing. I'm sitting there saying, but we already have too many buildings and now we want to add even more. That's the thing that worries me.
Well, yeah, and you just don't know until you see what they come back
Yeah,
with. I
yeah.
mean, there
And
are
so
times
yeah.
when if it's single-family lots that may be bigger lots that actually return more to the town than smaller
Yeah.
lots.
So if we did that in the RFI in an RFI process, I think that would be fine, because that would then give us something to deal with. If we, in the RFP process, all the advice I've gotten is, you gotta get the zoning done first, and then you issue the RFP. So the point is, you defer to an RFP process, then either you have to decide you're gonna zone it all as being developable land, or you're not, before the RFP goes out.
So I guess I see the RFI or the development committee that you're talking about as being ways of getting to that gut check
Yes,
before we get to the special town meeting and
Right.
vote on zoning.
Right.
So that,
right.
I mean, to me, that makes sense to do. And
Mhm.
whether we do it through hiring a real estate professional or appointing some people who are in the field who
Mhm.
want to do it on a volunteer basis,
Yep.
that gets me to the same gut check that I'm looking for, I guess,
Mhm.
before the special town meeting, that we have something that really is reasonable to take to the town and has a good chance of succeeding.
Could I make a suggestion here, and I don't know if we want to do it before the next meeting, or if we want to give ourselves 2 meetings, but this is just a thought. We could come back with a recommendation, with some thoughts about, and it's not my thinking, it's like people that I talk to about their ideas around what an RFI process might look like, and the 2 of you talk to folks as well, so I'm not trying to corner this one. But if we came back in for a discussion on this around both what an RFI process might look like, and also come in with some ideas about people here in town that could be potential members of that development committee. And I think it's with the idea of it being a small committee, not a large, we don't need a large committee, it's gotta be a small committee. Pete, to your point about the contractor, I would, if we knew that there was some super creative real estate development consulting company that, does the Disney World versions of large-scale development, I would be okay with trying to just get a really creative person coming in. I'm worried, though, that we wouldn't get that. What we would do is find some developer with a high, good reputation, but that just has kind of the standard answer, and we don't get anywhere with it. That's, if we could find people in town to be able to form a compact development committee who are people who both understand real estate but also have a personal stake because they live here in town and they understand the context of why we're trying to accomplish what we were trying to accomplish. That's kind of, trying to get that kind of a person who's really good at real estate development but understands the, qualitative or the aesthetic aspect of what we're trying to accomplish here that doesn't just translate into the greatest economic return on the investment.
You think those people exist who haven't yet stepped forward to
Yeah,
volunteer for the?
well,
Master
I've gotten some names of people, or I've been told there are names of people that are not currently serving on, or haven't served on any committees yet.
And who are interested in doing it?
Not, I just have the names as people who have the expertise. What I'm not sure is whether they're willing to serve on a committee like this, or if they're simply willing to provide advice. So they're people that have, one way or the other, indicated a willingness to offer advice. We haven't had a committee we haven't really put anything in place to try to do that. If we can't find volunteers that are willing to be on the development committee, then we're going to be stuck. Then I'd have to rethink even strategies around, do you go master developer, do you incrementally just wing it on your own, because that way at least you only make small mistakes at any given point in time.
Well, I'll have to think about that. I mean, as to the issue of reappointing the master planning committee, they have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow night. If we dissolve them tonight, they're no longer a committee of the town.
Okay.
You said you spent a lot of time with a lot of them talking about the master plan. I'm going to talk to them tomorrow.
So I'm not, my issue is, I think it's a mistake for us to set up a master planning committee and a development committee working at the same time. I think it's a mistake for us to extend the master planning effort for yet another year. I understand the master
I don't think
planning committee
anybody's
still has
expecting
work
that,
to
I
do.
think as it's
Okay.
conceived, this development committee will be
Okay.
extending the master planning process another year. We'll call it something else, we'll say it's something else, but that's what we'll be doing. Because what that development committee will be doing, as you described it, is getting advice on the master plan. And how to implement the master plan, or how to change the master plan, or how to throw out the master plan.
I don't think that this whole thing, I mean, I guess you're right, the development committee could go to developers. The developers could look at the master plan and start laughing and go, you guys are crazy. And every single one of them could do that and walk away. But if that's the case, how does a master planning committee going on for a fourth year help us?
Oh, I don't, look, do you want them to go on for a fourth year, Pete?
I don't know.
Yeah, me neither. I don't think either of us suggested.
I don't know if
So
the
what is the
committee- I don't
reappoint-
think
so,
the committee
okay,
wants
so
to go
what's
on
the
for another year,
reappointment?
But I think the committee does want to see the process through to the special town meeting, so, and so that we're assuming that we're gonna have the special town meeting in the fall, and that we're on a
So
trajectory
you're
to
gonna
get
put the
there.
master planning committee in charge of closing that gap between the developers?
No, look, if we
What-
decide as the Board of Selectmen, so this is not a, this is a substantive decision. We decide, look, we are not going to put anything as the Medfield State Hospital onto the special town meeting in the fall. We'll deal with the senior housing, we'll deal with Hinckley, we'll deal with these other things. We'll do that in the special town meeting in the fall, because that's ready to go. And we're gonna defer,
So we're not even gonna do the zoning at the special town meeting?
correct. We're, if we make a substantive decision, if we are going to do the zoning at the special town meeting,
Yep.
and we're gonna, if the idea is we're going to get one of two sets of responses, let's say we do it, we have an RFI, we somehow get a gaggle of, or a small number, or whatever is a small number of dedicated real estate professionals with deep knowledge of development who are deeply committed to Medfield, are seriously interested in the state hospital, and have not volunteered for anything to date. We're gonna devote a lot of time over the next 2 months to working on this, and we form that development committee. And they're gonna get one of two sets of responses. One is going to be your suggestion, right? You're crazy, this will not work. It's gotta be anything else, right? You should, whatever it is, right? And so, something new, something old, something that we don't know about, or it's gonna be, you need to do these 3 or 4 tweaks, okay? But the core vision of the master plan is, okay, it's workable, if you change it these 3 ways, I don't know what the changes would be if the zoning is as flexible as we say, but it's okay, the zoning's gotta be even more flexible, or you've gotta break it into 2, and you've gotta, whatever it
It's
is.
not, I don't see this as a zoning issue. This is a concept that we're asking people, the zoning isn't the issue. If all we want to do is just, let's pass the zoning, it's flexible zoning, it allows everything that we need, let's just do that, and then what? This has got to do with what the specification in that RFP calls out as what it is we need done. What are we trying to do? The zoning enables it, but the concept is what's in the RFP that says, here's what the town of Medfield wants to do with this property. Give us a proposal for how you can get us there. It's that concept. Right now, it exists as the master plan. The master and my whole point is the master plan, I'm not trashing the master planning committee for what they did, but the thing that's missing is closing that loop with real developers looking at this master plan and basically saying it's workable, it's not workable, it would be better if you did that. So when you go out with the RFP, take this concept of the master plan that you started with, modify it in these ways, and put that out as your specification in your RFP. And it'll be a lot easier for people like us to respond in a productive way. That's what I'm trying to get to.
Right, and what I'm just trying to get to is, at what point in the process are we doing that? Are we doing that before we do the zoning? That's what you said before.
And I'm suggesting we should do that because if there's changes that are made to the master plan, it would be better to tell the taxpayers, the residents of the town, what those changes are, and maybe even in some ways socialize why we had to do something. So if the master plan calls out for 300 units and we have to go to 350 units, we actually tell people that before we ask them to commit to the zoning.
Okay.
If we can, I
Okay.
prefer to do that.
So it's still the same scenario, though. We're either gonna get, modest feedback, or we're gonna get drastic feedback, right?
Yeah.
Or
And
we're
if-
just gonna get
yeah.
a thumbs up, hit it nail on the head, this is perfect, and you don't need anything else, right?
Yeah.
So those are the
Yeah.
3 options.
Yep.
In which case, then we're not gonna vote on anything at Medfield State Hospital in October, right? Because we're not
Well,
gonna
you'd-
accomplish
you'd-
all of these things.
if-
in October.
Well, I think you can. I've never done one of these RFIs. From what I've heard, it's like a 2-page document that you send out. So the real issues are, what are you going to put in that document? And it's like 2 pages long, so it's not a full-blown specification. And who do you send it to? That was the part that I think Chris and Peter basically suggested to me when I talked with them, that we can help you figure out what kind of developers you want to send this to, because we got a sense of what kind of developers are the kind that will be easier for, will be more responsive to the kind of thing you're trying to do. That was actually, when I talked with them, that was the greatest value to me in terms of what they said they could do, is to help kind of point us in that right direction for which developers would be the right kind of ones to go to. And they don't have to be the ones to do it, but that's what they told me they knew, had insight into, that I thought would be valuable to us.
And that can be accomplished before this fall.
Again, I think the first thing that has to happen is if we're gonna form a development committee, that has to happen first, and then it can be accomplished very quickly after that. So the question is how long we take to get that committee.
Well, if we haven't asked anyone yet to be on that committee, and I've talked to a few people about it, none of whom have volunteered, but agreed to
I
think about
didn't even know we were
people.
trying to form a committee, because, so
Well,
if we've been
I
trying
thought
to
we
do it.
were, but I was the only one who
Yeah.
wanted to at the time, but I've still been trying to find other people to do it.
Well,
So,
this is a useful conversation, because I brought up this committee last summer, and it didn't sound like there was any appetite for it. I know we kind of conceptually said we knew there would be a committee, but.
yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to create an appeals committee to the master planning committee. I want to create a committee that's going to be tasked with implementing whatever vision it is that the special town meeting, or town meeting, or whatever town meeting it is, endorses for the project. I mean, who will be involved, as they going to have to be involved in the evaluation of RFPs, the viability of particular developers, the how logical their financing schemes are, and all the rest of it, which are technical questions. My view of the master planning committee has been, this was a process that was set up in 2014 to provide an overall vision and guidance. We gave them guidance last September, and the guidance we gave them last September was, we want a master plan, we want zoning, and we want design guidelines, right? Or did we just say, whatever it is? We gave them, here's the guidance.
I think we only asked for the first two, but I think the design guidelines are a good thing, and they've done it,
Right.
yeah.
We didn't tell them, we expect you to issue an RFI as part of this process. We could have. We
Right.
didn't tell them, we want you to, we want you to do some sort of further on developer check beyond what you've done. We didn't tell them we thought their due diligence was faulty. We said, based on the work you've done to date,
Right.
we want a master plan and we want zoning. And so, I don't know why we would disband the committee when they are a couple weeks away from finishing the master
okay.
plan
Yep.
and providing us with zoning. And then we have, I think, a substantive decision to make about what are we gonna present to a town meeting. My view, and again, my overall view on the viability of the master plan has not changed. But I also am not just gonna try to hold it up for my own view of it. But then we have to decide, what is it we're gonna put before a town meeting? If the idea is, Gus, you don't wanna put anything before a town meeting before an RFI is issued. That's what I'm hearing you say.
I don't want to put anything before a town meeting until we have done a sanity check with developers that the master plan we have, in fact, is feasible, that it reflects, as best we can, it reflects a plan that would be attractive to developers, that all of the things being equal would cause them to be willing to put more money into the project than might otherwise be the case. So yeah, that's what I'm looking for, is that sanity check that connects the master plan as the aspirational plan it is right now, with real life, using developer inputs, that gives us the best shot at being able to issue an RFP that in true practical and economic terms is going to be sufficiently attractive to developers to get them to want to propose, but also accomplishes as much of what we're trying to accomplish through the master plan as is possible.
And before you just
Go
finish
ahead.
that, and you want to do that through a development committee consisting of volunteers from the town,
I would like to try to do that first, yeah,
as
because
opposed to just us issuing it.
yeah, yeah.
So I want that sort of gut check from the real estate development community as well, and I'm happy, I was thinking of getting it from hiring somebody to give it to us, but I'm very happy if we have volunteers that are willing to come forward and give us that, and have that expertise and are willing to share that with us. I'm happy to get it that way too. And I think that we should do that before the special town meeting, vote on the zoning, just in case there needs to be some tweaks.
Now,
Then
as far as the
just
reappointment,
before we
okay,
get to
sure.
that, so it seems like you both are in agreement, you want to issue an RFI before we send anything to the town meeting. So it seems like we should be issuing an RFI. The question then is,
So I would, as a caveat for me, I would like to get to the real estate professional, and part of my checking of that person's gut reaction is whether or not it makes sense to do the RFI. I would ask them first, and if they tell me absolutely not, then I would like to hear why.
well, certainly the one set of real estate professionals that have come and talked to us in this, recently in this process, they recommend doing an RFI. That's what Chris and is Peter, I'm sorry, I'm blanking.
Peter Ream.
Yeah, Chris and Peter suggested that we do, is we issue an RFI. This has obviously been a suggestion that's on the table for a number of years. If that's where you both are on it, I think then the next thing is process-wise. I think over the next 2 weeks, our next meeting is on the 31st. I think over the next 2 weeks, we got to reach out, and the summer is hard, but reach out to these people who are willing to give advice. If any of them are willing to serve formally on a committee, let's find that out. I think we should reach back out to Chris and Peter and see what they would be willing to do and whether they would be charging us for it or whatever else it would be in the RFI process, or if they would consider doing it on a volunteer basis, as Chris lives in Medfield.
Right.
It seems to me now you both would like to issue an RFI. I think, Pete, on whether to do an RFI or not, we're going to get half the real estate professionals saying no and half saying yes. Catherine McCabe's advice has been very strongly no. People on the other side have suggested we really ought to do it. My guess it's one of these things, it depends on your experience and your background. I don't think we're going to get a definitive answer from the capital R-E real estate community that you should or you shouldn't. And so it sounds like you both want this kind of a gut check on the master plan,
Yes.
so we ought to be moving to do that.
Yep.
Fair?
Yep.
Does that sound like
Yep.
a fair process for
Yep.
the next 2 weeks?
Yep.
We can reach out to whoever we have, and maybe we come back with names on the 31st of the committee. Maybe we come back with people who say, look, I'll write an RFI for you, or whatever. Make sense? Okay, and you're gonna, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just I
So,
want to get
yeah,
that.
so my,
What we're actually gonna do coming after this meeting with
That,
respect to
right,
this. Okay.
that makes sense. So to the matter at hand, whether or not to reappoint the Master Planning Committee, I have no problem with reappointing the Master Planning Committee to enable them to continue to operate, to complete their master plan. What I think happens is that committee continues until, or up at least as late as the point at which we establish the Development Committee, at which time this committee's work is done, the next committee takes over to carry it forward.
And I think
that's-
that it depends on
Yeah.
what the response to that RFI market check is going to be, right? If it's a couple of tweaks, then I think the committee wants to see it through and be
Well,
part
no,
of the
the
process and presenting it to a special town meeting.
No, who's doing the RFI market check? It's
Well,
not
we
the,
have to
it's not the
figure-
Master Planning
we gotta
Committee,
figure
it's
it
the
out.
Development
We
Committee.
gotta figure out, well, first of all, we have to figure out if anyone wants to be on it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so we can't, I mean, none of us are economists, so we can't just assume a development. We have to
Yeah.
actually find one.
Yeah, no,
And-
that's fine.
And if we can't find one, we'll have to find a different way of getting the RFI market check. That's what I was
That's
saying.
fair,
we're
that's
trying
fair,
to
yeah.
Accomplish in the
So
next 2 weeks.
my whole point is, at the point that we're going into that stage of the process, this committee does not need to continue. Yeah, I'm not sure they even want to be honest with you. mean,
I think they want to continue until a
to get their
presentation
job
to
done,
the
yeah,
town meeting.
yeah. Well,
Right, but to me, again,
I think that's a mistake.
well, but one way or the other, I'm not in favor of their plan, so
Yeah.
I'm not going to be there advocating for their plan at a town meeting. So, I mean, whether it's a mistake or not, it depends on what we're presenting. If we're largely presenting their vision, it would be up to the people who are in favor of their vision to say what role they're going to have. So, I just don't think we know the answer to that.
So I'm in favor of reappointing them until
too.
they have delivered a final master plan, design guidelines, and zoning recommendations, which I think is what they would like to be able to finish.
We have
That's it.
got their drafts right here.
Yeah, yeah.
So when these are final, right,
Right.
then we'll figure out what's going to happen.
So-
But I think we should reappoint
Right.
them
Okay,
for now.
all right.
Good luck putting that motion together.
Oh, no, I move that we reappoint the,
Glad you didn't do this one first.
move that we reappoint the State Hospital Master Planning Committee to enable them to complete the work they're doing on the master plan, the design guidelines, and the zoning regulations, zoning change recommendations, until such time as that effort is ready to be transferred over to a follow-on committee, the exact
Second.
name of which to be designated.
Second?
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
State Hospital Mediation Committee.
Keep them.
Keep them, all
Keep
right?
them.
No motion?
I move that we reappoint the 3 members of the State Hospital Mediation Committee to another 1-year term.
Second?
All in favor?
Yep.
The State Hospital Negotiating Committee.
Keep them.
Keep them.
We're still working on the roadway and the access.
Still negotiating, all right.
Okay, I move that we reappoint the
except for Steve.
The State Hospital Negotiating Committee members, Ken Richard is on that one still. Good. John Harney, Bill Massaro, and Osler Peterson, and recognizing Stephen Nolan has resigned. We okay with just the four? Do we need a replacement?
Yeah.
No. Okay. 2 one-year terms through
Second.
2019.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. The Town Bylaw Review Committee. We may have some bylaws to review.
Yes, and unfortunately, I have a cut and paste error. You'll see the State Hospital Negotiating Committee was I just put them in for the Town Bylaw Review Committee.
Okay,
It
we'll
is-
go with them.
Well, I was looking, I was like, wow, we put Bill on the Town Bylaw Review Committee?
I think
It's
that's a
actually-
great idea.
Over my dead body.
You don't want like 10-page emails at 3:30 in the morning, Mark?
You didn't get it all?
I put it out in small print.
Town Bylaw Review Committee is actually Cynthia Green, Russ Hallisey, Steve Nolan, Neil O'Connor, and John McNicholas.
So everybody except Steve will
Yes.
be reappointed.
So Cynthia Green,
Russ Hallisey.
let's see.
Neil O'Connor's on this committee, as well as John McNicholas. John McNicholas.
Nicholas. And I think we make Bill, we assign him in the event that he fails to prevent a massive development up at the state hospital, because we will need him to talk about all the bylaws that are required.
How many members
large
are there on
scale.
that committee? How many members, Chris?
4. So I
Steve Nolan resigned.
So you said Jack McNicholas was on it?
Yep.
I have Cynthia Green, Russ Hallisey, who am I missing?
Neil O'Connor.
okay, you okay with that, Mark?
I really don't have any.
Okay. I move that we reappoint Cynthia Green, Russ Hallisey, Neil O'Connor, and John McNicholas
McNicholas.
as members of the Town Bylaw Review Committee, 1-year term out through 2019.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The Townwide Master Plan Steering Committee, this committee charter really expires with the approval of the, going forward with the master plan. We will need to appoint a new committee to oversee the master plan itself.
Which, are we talking about the townwide master
Townwide
plan?
Yeah.
So,
So, I mean, this committee charter was really just to plan the plan. And so I don't know that we didn't hear back from any of these folks, did we?
I did not hear back from them. I did talk to, I did not hear back from their final.
I know Mike Quinlan is
Think
not
about-
gonna be a part of it.
Yep.
And I think one of the things I have on our town goals is the appointment of a master planning committee to oversee the townwide master plan, or to decide how we're gonna do the townwide master plan. So I don't know that this committee needs to continue to exist. It may be reconstituted, or maybe some members are interested in continuing. I don't know if they are or they aren't, but they have not done, they've not been active of late, and I don't know that, certainly in their charter does not contemplate that they will be responsible for the master plan itself.
so you're saying we need a committee this year to carry out the townwide master planning effort?
Assuming we want to do it this year, yeah. We'll
Well,
need to
we've got money
decide
for it this
how-
year.
Yeah, but the money will be there next year, it's capital, so it doesn't have to be done this year. I think it probably should be done this year, but,
Yeah.
yes, I think likely we'll need a new committee or a rechartered committee, because this committee's charter was really just to decide whether we should have an update to the townwide master plan and how we'd go about doing it.
So we're just gonna dissolve this committee?
I would dissolve this committee, and then, but in the letter to them, Evelyn's letters to them, but should note that we likely will be appointing a new committee for the master plan, and if they're interested in serving on that committee, they should let us know.
Mhm.
Does that make
Okay.
sense to you guys?
Okay,
Yep.
yep.
Makes sense to you?
Absolutely.
Okay, I move that we dissolve the townwide master plan steering committee.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And send a letter along those lines to
Mhm.
those members. Thanking them for their service and letting them know that we will be in touch with respect to what the next step is with the townwide master plan. But I think that was the last message from Quinlan as well, is that they were not prepared necessarily to take over that process.
Okay.
The Transfer Station Recycling Committee, they are certainly continuing.
They're continuing. Rachel Brown has resigned from the committee, though.
Okay.
And
And
Did
Rick
Rick
Fink is
Fink?
on there too. We had appointed Rick Fink during the year last year,
Correct.
and I assume he wants to be reappointed.
Yes, he's in the
See,
list
they've
of
done nice
reappointments.
videos for them promoting some of their sales, so.
Okay, I move that we reappoint the current members of the Transfer Station and Recycling Committee, with the exception of Rachel Brown, who has resigned, and confirming Rick Fink's mid-year appointment
Second?
to one-year term, 2019. Second.
All in favor? Yep.
Aye.
All right, we have concluded the Exhibit A committee reappointments.
All right.
But I'm gonna say we also concluded our discussion.
Okay.
Cut that off, unless there's more to
Perfect.
discuss on that. But let's move on to Exhibit B. Affordable Housing Trust, we made a mistake last year in the bylaws for the Affordable Housing Trust. We're supposed to have staggered terms. So in the reappointments for this year, we need to reappoint some people to 1 year, some people to,
Okay.
they're all 2-year terms.
2
So
years.
it's a matter of really reappointing
But
3 people to a 2-year term that starts now.
This already says 3 people have one-year terms.
Yeah, but I think that's not, last year, nobody is up for reappointment now.
no?
I think we should reappoint 3 people to
Yeah.
a 2-year term starting now, and those 3 people will be there through 2020.
So would those people be the ones that are under the length of term right now for the longer term?
Right now, everybody has a 2-year term. That was in the bylaw. We did not specify.
but-
Yeah, this
would-
is my proposed, what you would do.
Well, that's what I
Yeah.
was getting at. So when you talk about proposing
Yeah.
a staggered term, are these the,
I just put them out there in order. It was just more of a holding place that we needed to do it.
so who should have 2 more years and who should have 1 more
So
year?
I should only have 1 more year. My term on the Board of Selectmen is up next year.
Okay.
And so I'm on there as the Selectman representative, so.
Yep.
And then as to the rest of them, I think everybody's willing to stay. So I don't know that it matters one way or the other. I would say that the 2, Jack Wolf is sort of on there as a warrant committee member, and Ann Thompson as the AHC. I would have them each with a year left. And then I would appoint Jim Brand, Todd, Tim Bonfatti, and Adam to 2 years from now, through 2020.
Great, okay. Give me a second here. So I move that we reappoint the members of the Affordable Housing Trust as follows. Mike, to 1 year.
No, we don't need to appoint the 1 years, because we're still in a 2-year term. So you'd be
Oh.
appointing to a 2-year term Adam Amadin, Tim Bonfatti, Todd Triubenko, and Jim Brand.
Okay. So I recommend the following members of the Affordable Housing Trust be reappointed to the Affordable Housing Trust to 2-year terms: Adam Amadin, Tim Bonfatti, Todd Triubenko, and Jim Brand.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
ZBA, Steve Nolan is resigning. And Doug Boyer moved out of town. Are either of the associate members going to be appointed as full-time members?
Not at this time. They're still looking for a full-time member.
So we can at least reappoint
Reappoint the associates for
Charlie
now.
and John, and then reappoint, well, I guess,
You don't have to do Charlie.
No,
or-
just,
okay.
Just the 2 associates.
I move that we reappoint 2 associate members to the Zoning Board of Appeals, William McNiff and Michael Witcher, to 1-year terms through 2019.
all in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
Americans with Disability Compliance Review Committee.
This is a mandated committee. You're required to have it. So Michael and I talked about where it's required. You may want to do a 3-year appointment or even stagger them either way, but where you're required to have it, one seems silly.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Does anyone have a problem with the recommended length of term?
Nope.
So these are recommendations.
I'm just making recommendations.
Okay with that? Okay, so I move that we reappoint the 3 members of the Americans with Disability Compliance Review Committee, Maurice Goulet, to a 3-year term through 2021, Mike Sullivan to a 2-year term out through 2020, and Ann Thompson to a 1-year term out through 2019.
All in favor? Yep. You don't have to do any to the Board of Health.
Nope.
Board of Registrars, does Mr. Gallagher consent to be reappointed?
Yes.
I move that we reappoint William Gallagher to a 3-year term to the Board of Registrars.
Second.
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
We Board of Water and Sewerage, we have to find a replacement for Jeremy Marset. Conservation Commission, it looks like Ralph and Bobby Kennedy are up this year.
Mhm.
Along with George Darrell, the associate member. Do Ralph and Bobby want to be reappointed?
They do. And they are working on their annual questionnaire, which they will get you, but everybody did want to be reappointed.
Okay.
I move that we reappoint Robert Kennedy Jr., Ralph Parmesan to the Conservation Commission for 3-year terms out through 2021.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And then the associate member?
Oh, I'm sorry. Also move that we reappoint George Darrell as an associate member to a 1-year term out through 2019.
Second.
Sorry about that.
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
And Enterprise Fund Committee. Looks like, so would Jeremy be off this one as well? If he's on this
Correct.
as Water and Sewerage Board member?
And then everybody else was interested in being reappointed.
I recommend that we reappoint Georgia Kalivas, Maurice Goulet, Michael Sullivan, Christine Trierlau, Joy Rashudo, Christian Carpenter, and Bill Harvey to 1-year terms on the Enterprise Fund Committee.
Second.
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
And we have David Scharf and Bradley Phipps up as members of the Historic District Commission.
I recommend that we reappoint David Scharf and Bradley Phipps to 3-year terms to the Historic District Commission out through 2021.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And the Permanent Planning and Building Committee. So under the, under the bylaw that we adopted, it's now a 3-year term, and then they're staggered as well?
Correct.
And so, don't they have we're missing somebody on here.
I'm missing somebody.
They have a 5th member that we appointed.
Lou Fellini was on it. Is he still on it?
No, Lou Fellini resigned. We have a replacement, and I can't think of what their name is. Hold on.
Kincaid, Quinlan, it's in, is it,
Mike Weber.
Mike Weber? We just did it because he's on the Dale Street
Yep.
Building Committee. So I would suggest, I mean, we don't have, they didn't make a recommendation as to the staggering, but I would suggest that we put Quinlan and Weber on for 3 years, Kincaid and Erb on for 2, and Bonfatti on for 1.
That works.
Say that again? Who's on 2?
Would be
Kincaid and who?
Kincaid and Tom Erb for
Tom
2,
Erb, okay.
and Bonfatti for 1.
And Mike Sullivan?
Ex officio.
Ex
Ex
officio,
officio
just
is
one
one.
automatically, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does anyone have an objection to that?
Nope,
Christine,
that's-
no problem with
That's
that?
fine.
No, what was Tim Bonfatti's?
One.
One.
He's the one. Urban Kincaid are for 2, and
Okay.
Quinlan and Weber are for 3.
Got it.
So I move that we reappoint, give me a second here, let me just write these down. That we reappoint Michael Quinlan and Mike Weber to 3-year terms on the Permanent Planning and Building Committee out through 2021. Reappoint Thomas Erb and Walter Kincaid to 2-year terms on the Permanent Planning and Building Committee out through 2020. And reappoint Tim Bonfatti and Mike Sullivan, ex officio member, to 1-year terms out through 2019.
Second.
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
All right. Individual appointments. Anyone have any issues with any of our individual appointments?
These are all just 1-year appointments, right?
These are all 1 year.
Who we have is the fence measure.
Building commissioner.
Field driver and fence viewer, yeah. It's like between that and the keepers of the town clock.
I like the measure of wooden bark.
These should be like really highly competitive honorary positions. We do this as a consent calendar on the whole.
I think we
whole lot.
probably move all the individual appointments.
That would be great.
We could discuss them all. Okay. I move that we accept all of the proposed reappointments listed on the individual appointments list to one-year terms, reappointed through 2019.
Second?
All in favor?
Yep.
It just, with these individual appointments, it occurs to me that one item we ought to put on our July 31st agenda, because we'll be coming up close on Chief Meany's retirement after that, is probably the formal, assuming we are gonna appoint Deputy Chief as the acting Chief of Police upon Chief
Yeah.
Meany's retirement.
Yeah.
If we're not gonna do that, then we don't really have to do it, but I think, that's certainly my view. that
I
we
would
ought to
think
do
we
that.
should. yeah.
I think
We
we
should do
should.
that for July 31st.
Yeah.
and
That was,
because-
I had that on your list of
Okay.
proposed items to do.
Yeah, just to make sure that is done, because I think the chief is planning to retire the following, that Friday.
We've been negotiating that Friday or the following Friday. But it
either
will be
way, I
that
think
week,
that'll
it should
be our
be,
next meeting
yeah.
On the 31st, so we should make sure that's on the agenda, hopefully.
Mark, I think we should do that. I'm just curious, though, are there legal reasons why we would absolutely want to designate an acting police chief? Chief of police, be police chief.
We're kind of, only to have somebody responsible for the department. We're in legal limbo. We never have accepted either of the alternate chief statute, so it's kind of a home rule situation anyway.
Okay, so I think the answer
They
to
have
my question
independent
is no.
authority.
not-
If the town had accepted one of those statutes, it would have
Yeah.
been way more important,
Okay,
but they didn't.
well, I still think we should do it. I just was
Yeah,
curious.
someone has to be the police chief, so we
Okay.
can put that out on the 31st.
So Mark, is that something that we should be looking at? That's an issue that I guess I wasn't aware of. Is that a gap in our,
It was controversial when it was,
Oh.
when it last came up, and that was quite a few years ago. So,
all right.
We
I was-
decided when we
her,
went through the process for appointing Chief Meany, we decided not to.
I think Hurley was chief at the time that the issue arose, and there was some pushback, so they could never agree on which way to go.
Mark was worn down with the dog control bylaws at the time.
All right,
Okay.
thus endeth the annual planning discussion.
It's already been a long night.
All right, financial policies. Do we have further comment or discussion?
Yeah, I do. To propose, this is a follow-up to the stuff that I'd already sent out to you guys, and I've asked Mike Sullivan to take a look at the kind of the accounting completeness of this. What I'm proposing here is that if we're going to talk about financial policies, we probably want to talk about all the financial policies that might be important. The issue here, this is a follow-up to what I'd already passed out to you around this idea that it's apparently referred to as the Lexington model for budgeting. And what I did was I took that concept and I tried to create what it would look like here in Medfield. The point behind this is in terms of looking at how to develop our town budget, particularly in light of Prop 2.5. This thing, if you start at the top of the list and work your way down, what it does on the first page is it first calculates the projected general revenues that come into the town to establish a total available general revenues. What this is basically doing is it's taking certain categories in our budget and it's putting them at the top that are things that come straight off. If you recall, in this year, going into the town meeting, we had a meeting where we actually talked about possibly having an override, I think, about the employee and town and school employee benefits budget, because that was the budget that had jumped, except the problem was that's not a budget that the taxpayers can say they don't want to fund, because it's not discretionary. So what this is doing, it's basically saying, start off with general revenues, Right off the top of those general revenues, you take out and this is from Mike's sheet, there's certain fixed expenditures that are things we don't have any choice about spending money on. Next down is the category town and school employee benefits, which again, we don't have any choice to spend money on. Next below that is debt service, which really we don't have any choice about spending money on. The fourth item here, capital budgets, certainly the stabilization fund that passed is going to be here because that's a targeted fund, but from a financial policy standpoint, if we want to have any other financial policy relative to capital spending that goes above and beyond the maintenance stabilization fund, and obviously we do, those things would also come off the top before we get started. And then if there are any other funds for special articles that we want, that basically have the town's support, we take those things all off the front end of this thing. What that does, that leaves a balance of available general revenues from the total revenues coming into the town. That then gets split in a pre-specified way. There's nothing sacred about the 35%, 65%, other than it seems like the towns that do this kind of have a 1/3, 2/3 split. You then add in dedicated revenues that go to one side or the other of the town. And the best I could identify were these that I've got listed here. That then gives the total available revenues on the town side, the total available revenues on the school side. And then you're going to have a town operating budget and the school operating budget, and each one of them will come at the bottom, will come out to either one side or the other needs an operating override. There's provisions at the front, you'll see at the very top, that if we had planned overrides, the very first page, we could actually, if we were in a situation where as a town we felt like an override was truly required, we would pre-endorse that up front with our calculation in terms of what we're planning against. The one specific flaw that I think and I've asked Mike to help out with this, I have not included the enterprise funds in this overall scheme, but I did include the transfer payments from water and sewer that go to the town to offset town costs. And I just want Mike to take a look at it. It may turn out that what we need to do is build in the whole enchilada for water and sewer enterprise funds or any other enterprise funds and account for it. Right now, I tried to keep it focused on the operating budget. So this may not be the ultimate be-all and end-all, but the purpose behind this is certainly at our level, it might help us understand where we are when we're taking a look at operating overrides in a given budget year. I provided this to Mike Pastore, Tom Marie, and Jack Wolf only because I've had conversations with them. In many ways, this would be more important for the warrant committee because if this is a framework, and they haven't endorsed it, but if this is a framework that makes sense, then when at the beginning of the fiscal year, when we begin our next budget cycle, which we're going to be beginning in October, and the warrant committee has to come up with budget guidance, this actually specifies a number. It's not just pick a percentage out of the air. I think this will clear up some of the misrepresented information that came out in the discussions this past year. It puts it on a more objective basis. People, taxpayers will see what is and isn't in compliance, and then they can make their decisions. But at least will avoid some of the things that we have been doing that clearly didn't work well this past year. So I would suggest this as an addition to the finance.
I think it's an excellent idea, Gus, and I especially like the idea of determining the allocation between the schools and the town and just
Right.
kind of stick to that.
Right.
One thing I would add above the line here, from the other financial policies, the
Yep.
OPEB,
Yeah.
reserves and free
Right.
cash.
Right.
Um,
I actually did, so what I did on there, if you look at 2, it's called Town and School Employee Benefits,
okay.
but I added OPEB. I did it with a question mark, but I would agree with you that that should happen. And I also, the other one you'll see under number 1, I added the MSH, I called it the MSH MPC annual maintenance budget, but what I really mean, it shouldn't be MPC, it should just be MSH. The issue this year, because we had a revolving fund, I don't want to fight what the taxpayers did, but I have said this before. I think what the taxpayers decided to do at the town meeting was a dumb thing to do, only because I don't think people understood it. The taxpayers decided not to put any money into the further development of the state hospital for $75,000, and as a result, we run the risk of extending the maintenance of the state hospital by another year at a rate that's been running at $150,000 a year. It occurred to me, what if we had not had the revolving, the fund that you used to pay for the $150,000 for this year for the maintenance, and if the taxpayers just said no?
We'd have
Like-
some really long grass.
Yeah, well, it's worse than that. We would have security breaches, we would have tremendous liability. So I'm not talking about the development cost, that's legit, if you don't want to pay for it, that's fine, but the maintenance cost of the state hospital property, as long as we own it, undeveloped, is not effectively a discretionary decision. We need to fund that. It may be that in any given year, if we have funds because we've generated revenues and we don't need to ask for anything, that's fine. But if we have a year where we've exhausted that money, which will happen next year at the latest, we actually need to lock that in as something that we pay for. We don't have the option to just say, no, we don't like the way this has gone, we're not going to put any money into the state hospital. So that was the other item that I put in here that I think probably belongs there.
Yeah, so I would add the stabilization fund contributions to that as well, and the reserve fund.
Yeah, so, where'd I put that? I put, plan general free, I agree with that, yeah, so it's stabilization fund.
Because with respect to the,
You
and
put it under
there's,
number 4, Gus.
This
Facilities
is revenue side. No, I think he's talking about the use of this, so the revenue side, the contribution. So if you look on the very front under general revenues, down just above the bottom there, it says planned general free cash contribution to budget. It should also be planned stabilization contribution to budget, and I guess planned.
but the stabilization is an expense, right?
Well, no, I thought you were talking about taking money out of the
I'm
stabilization
talking about
fund.
the 200,000.
Oh, that's in here, under facilities, under number 4,
No,
facilities maintenance.
that's only for I'm talking about the town's general stabilization fund. So every year we put $150,000 into the reserve fund, and we put $200,000 into the town's general stabilization fund. And so under our capital policies,
Okay,
we kind of agree we've agreed that as to what the reserves are going to be and the goals of the reserves. And so we make, that's an expenditure that should not be included with the operating budget. That's sort of.
so you're saying under
I would put it under 4.
4,
I mean,
and it's contribution to stabilization fund.
correct, and reserve fund.
Stabilization fund.
And maybe reserve fund comes under a different category, because that's more of an annual operating budget issue, whereas the contribution to the stabilization fund is really a capital issue
Yeah.
in sort of the town's
think here.
savings account.
So contribution to reserve fund, one thing it could, it's not a big deal, I mean, we can put it wherever we want.
Yeah, it's not a huge amount, but I think
I-
those
well,
amounts.
For right now, let me put it under fixed expenditures. And so it's contribution to reserve fund. What gets but I also think up at the top there, under the revenue side, where we have planned general free cash contribution to budget, should we also carry an item for planned stabilization contribution and planned reserve fund contribution, right?
Well, we don't plan on a reserve fund contribution. Reserve is it comes out as
Okay.
an expense line item.
Okay,
It's an appropriation.
yeah, you're right, okay. So
But yeah, I think
planned
we should
general
have
stabilization contribution
municipal
budget.
stabilization fund
Yep.
revenue.
Yep,
And I think, you already have enterprise, you already have,
enterprise fund, yeah.
enterprise, but we should have revolving fund contributions too, because for years when the MSA revolving fund or other revolving funds are gonna be used for.
Well, here, I'll tell you why I avoided that. Because the individual revolving funds use those revolving funds to offset their operating budgets. And so if, you know, the library revolving fund translates into a lower library operating budget line. So that will throw us into more of an accounting drill here around operating fund, revolving funds go here,
Right.
and the revolving fund expenditures. I was trying to avoid that part of it.
Right.
And I did think, are there any other revolving funds? You know, I don't think we have any other revolving funds that are kind of just general revolving funds that can throw money off wherever it needs to go, so.
They're mostly departmental.
Yeah, so that's why I didn't do that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Now, ideally, I think this framework would make the job of the warrant committee. The warrant committee, just so you know, the warrant committee, the board of selectmen, the town administration, all still make recommendations about budgets. But what it does is it takes the town administration and the warrant committee out of the burden of trying to figure out how to hammer a reconciled budget between the two sides. If it turns out that that the town side doesn't need all the money that's available to the town, then sure, we're gonna transfer that over to offset. If there was something on the school side that's above the limit, then we would use that to offset it, but it doesn't set up this obligation where either the warrant committee or the town administrator have to do extraordinary things trying to hammer out an agreement. Because, to be honest, this past year, we broke that. And we wound up getting people pretty stressed, wasting a lot of time, when back the taxpayers said we're perfectly comfortable making our own decisions about what we want to throw money at. So I think we still make the recommendations, but this doesn't put people who really aren't in control of the circumstances and holding the responsibility to do something about them.
And it sets a level of expectation at the outset.
Yeah,
for people.
ideally, the warrant committee will like this as well. But they know less about it than you two do now as of this conversation. I can see us, I think it can be a separate decision if it needs to be, but it seems, in many ways, I think this concept is gonna be more valuable to the warrant committee even than it is to us.
What about with respect to this? Can we adopt this?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I will raise one question. I'm happy to do what we say we're gonna do, so I'm not, the one thing that I've raised before has to do with the statement on OPEB funding. So this is making a commitment to increasing OPEB funding, and obviously I'm not gonna be arguing against that. What the heck, there it is. The one thought I had, so what this is saying is right now, next year, the 400,000 will go up to 425, which I think is great. And then that contribution will increase 10% annually thereafter, which says the following year it's gonna go up by, well, I mean, if it's policy, it's policy. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything. But that says the next year, that's a $42,500 increase. I'm delighted with that. I don't think we need to revisit that from a financial standpoint until we start closing in on $750,000, $800,000 contribution is my best guess at where we would finally be considering possibly that we could be overshooting the mark. As an alternative, I would consider basically stating here that we will increase this by $5,000 for every new hire in the past year. Because that, based on what we did with the analyst study committee, it took some work, but getting the actuaries to pin them down, they kind of said it's about $5,000 is the incremental cost. Now, it's not net new hire, it's a new hire, because you still have the retiree benefits from the old hire. That would, in this coming year, instead of increasing it by 25,000 next year, that would probably increase it, how many new hires?
Are you doing school and town?
Yeah, everything. Yeah, it's across the board. So in this first year, in next year, it would actually, presumably the 4 new hires for the paramedics is already covered under the override. So it's not like we haven't provided for it. With 6 new hires in the schools, that's at $50,000. So but on the other hand, it wouldn't keep going up compounded 10% every year. It'd be a function of who we hire. That kind of promotes the discipline around us fully recognizing the financial impacts of hiring new people. So I can see some value to that.
I think it would, And what is our annual, I mean, our annual turnover has gotta be in employees, it's gotta be north of 10 typically.
So maybe, yeah, so maybe,
I think the 10% is probably lower for a while,
Okay,
right? I
yeah.
mean, just in terms of, like, most years, we get retirements and people who
Yeah.
succeed, you know. I mean,
But
I think, I was actually
okay.
thinking about this, about the $5,000 number,
Mhm.
right? Because if you actually did that across all of the employees in the town,
mhm,
you know, that would be a $2.5 million annual contribution, roughly, about 500
Mhm.
employees.
Yeah.
That-
Yeah,
give or
roughly.
take about
Yeah.
500 employees in
oh,
the
yeah,
town,
yeah.
right?
I'm just trying not to
Yeah.
have the hole get deeper.
Right. No, I agree with you, because at some point, I mean, if we were in 1990, right, and we could see this coming,
Mhm.
I mean, the OPEB contributions would be a line item in every department budget.
Right.
Right, you'd make
Right.
OPEB contributions, and each department would have to reflect within its, because what we're really doing with this 425 is, you know, filling in a deficit that's accumulated
Right.
because,
Right.
you know, over years.
Right.
And so, you can't, it'd be too much of a shock to the system to shift it all and immediately
Right.
say, you've gotta add now $2.5
Mhm.
million. You know,
So I'm okay with the 10%.
Yeah.
It's just that we either mean it or we don't mean it. If we mean it, that number jumps pretty fast. And at some point, you know, I don't think you revisit that decision until you get to the $750,000, $800,000 a year.
and
number.
I would stick with this, and the
Okay.
school committee's indicated support for this approach.
Okay.
So,
Done.
so if we get a motion to adopt this, we can
Sure.
sign it and get it over to the
Yep.
school committee.
So I guess the
Well-
question, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, do we incorporate that or?
No, I think we need more discussion.
Well, so I think this is part of the financial policy is what I'm saying. So I don't think we just adopt this and then talk
Right,
about
I'm just
this. I
saying the school
think
committee's not gonna agree to this.
they don't have to.
Right, but
I mean, this is our
they-
policy.
They would agree to this.
Then I won't vote for it. I'm not prepared to go. If that's the issue we have, is that we're not gonna fix this problem, then I'm not on board with this financial guideline. You guys can vote for it if you want, but that's,
Okay,
the
but
question is, why wouldn't the school committee vote for that?
why wouldn't they vote for it?
Yeah.
Because they're gonna say, if the town doesn't need to spend that much in a given year, the money can go to the school departments, they avoid an override.
And I'm totally okay with that,
Which
if the
changes
town
nothing,
doesn't
which
need to do it.
changes nothing.
Oh, it absolutely does.
Your plan only works if we stick to that, and even if the town budget only needs 25% of that.
No,
we don't- it
I
doesn't-
said, no, I mean, if
we're
you
gonna
wanna,
be doing the exact
if
same
you
thing,
wanted,
But having a discussion of how much do you really need it? That's what the conversation's gonna be.
Mike, let's
So,
talk about the misrepresentation in this year's budget discussion.
I didn't
Where
make-
the
I didn't make any
schools,
misrepresentation
where
in
the
this year's
school,
budget.
no, I'm not talking about you, where the schools have represented, if this override passes, we shouldn't need an override for several years. What does that mean if the schools don't intend to stay within 2.5%?
What that means in their view is that their budget needs to increase at a greater rate than the other town budgets.
Exactly, and this thing allows that to happen, and it allows the taxpayers to see that increase and to approve that increase. I'm not trying to not have that happen. I'm trying to make sure that it's visible and that we don't have the town sacrifice in order to make something not appear to be an override.
Right.
That is an
That's a
override.
perfectly fair point.
Yeah,
But that's only gonna work
okay.
if you're always spending that money or accounting for that much on the town side.
Or the
And saying,
town-
look, the town is, you know, because we've been disciplined, we have 300,000 extra dollars, that money is gonna go an extra stabilization fund contribution, an extra OPEB contribution, and the school will have to have a $300,000 override. That's the only way that policy changes.
So if your point is, if the town does not need to use its full allocated Prop 2.5 increase, I agree that if you don't use it, then you give it to the school. If the school needs it and the town doesn't. I'm not arguing, I'm not saying let's have artificial overrides by throwing money into a reserve fund. I'm trying to put a stop to something that happened this year, both in terms of misrepresenting
No,
the
but
budget
then-
and in putting people who are not in control under a lot of stress trying to make something happen that wasn't
We
gonna
don't,
happen.
we don't need a change in a budgeting procedure to adjust the way people argue for the positions that they hold. So if the only point here is you want to have something else to show that you think the school committee is not telling the truth when they're saying we don't need an
No,
override.
no, I
We
want.
don't need that for that.
I want, Mike, what is wrong with that framework?
There's nothing wrong with the framework,
Okay,
nothing at all. But
Then
it's
what is
only,
the problem
it's
with-
only a change from what we're doing
yes.
if we're never going to shift anything from the town side to the school side.
No, I'm okay with putting a provision in here that if there, I mean, it's pretty easy to do that. which is basically over here, instead of just assuming that there's an override, there could be an underride here, and there can be a transfer. I have no problem with that.
Right, but that's the same thing we already do.
No, that's not the same thing we do. What happened this year is we have a town administrator who controls a third of the budget, who sat there and hammered the town departments to try to beat them down in order to fit the warrant committee's recommendation. That was not the town saying we don't need the money. That was the town saying we're gonna do extraordinary things to our own budgets in order to try to minimize the impact of the school budget increase on the overall town budget. That was not the town saying we don't need the money.
I agree.
That's the piece that I want to take out of this equation.
Right, but we don't need this to do it. We
Of
can
course.
we can just tell the town administrator, don't do that.
And then what, so then you get to this.
Right, we
So then you
we
get
told
to
the
this.
town administrator this year, see what you can do, right? We didn't say we're gonna do it. We said, see what you can do to, what would the budgets look like if we passed the school budget, right? We looked at what the budget looked like, and we said, you know what, we can't do that. And so we shifted away from it with an override. And that's, and we, most of the town budgets ended up in, the Article 11 balanced budget.
Most of the town.
Most of the town budgets.
Right.
It could have been different, right? And if the school committee approached this differently, they could have said, no. All your stuff can go over here, and our stuff is gonna go over here, right? They didn't. And they put almost all of the override was just the school budget. And that was what was sort of on the chopping block in that process, right? There was no requirement in the town charter that it be that way. That's the way we all, in our April 10th meeting, we kind of all agreed, this is how it was gonna be laid out, because honestly, that was what was driving it, ultimately, right? I mean, the school budget was what was driving the need for the override, and so that was the amount that was being voted on with the override. I think the total amount of the town budgets and the override side was about $100,000.
And the only reason there was $130,000, and the only reason any of that was there was because the town administrator tried to beat the town budgets in order to get it in line with the warrant committee 4% recommendation. This here, part of why I advocate this is that this is giving people a number. When the warrant committee gave its guidance that said you have to stay within 4%, where did that number come from? Just pick a number. And the number is, well, the conventional wisdom is that schools have to grow at least at 4%, so I guess we have to live with that. The 4% number is not a number that the town can sustain if the town wants to not have overrides and wants to keep the town services even at the level that they're at, forget growing with the level that they're at. It's an unsustainable approach.
Right.
This is basically.
No disagreement
Yeah,
with that.
all this is doing is saying, listen, when the taxpayers are faced with overrides, they know what the override is, they know which side of the budget it's on, and they make a decision that they want to endorse it. That's pretty straightforward. It's just, it gives them a number. We don't have the warrant committee trying to figure out what the reconciled number might be that might work or won't work. We don't have a town administrator sitting there trying to squeeze things out of the town departments just to make this whole budget work when the town administrator only controls a third of it. It basically puts the stuff out in black and white in quantitative terms on which side needs overrides. I think it's entirely appropriate if one side's not using its full allocation. I think there's no problem with saying this is a contribution we can cross over the line. That piece, I don't have a problem with that. I'm not trying to generate overrides here, but we have not gotten out in front of this problem. And right now, we're on a path that does not work.
Well, that's fine, right, but the only way this works is if you're not gonna make those transfers. Because the pressure is always going to be, the town administrator ultimately has responsibility for the whole town, right now. They don't
It doesn't mean
control-
anything when it doesn't have, when you say responsible, but there's no
This is
authority
just a
over
di-
2/3
this-
of the
this
budget,
is
that
just-
doesn't mean
This is just a
anything.
different version of the warrant committee budget guidance that has not been adhered to over the years, and ultimately ends up in a situation where you're trying to cram the budgets together and squeezing the budgets you think can be squeezed. And that's what's gonna happen anyway. There's still gonna be the question of, well, how much do you really need it? How much do they really need it? Can we do that
So,
otherwise?
no,
I think
no,
you'd
no,
have
no,
a
so
stronger
there's-
position if you were saying, we are going to spend that 35% on the town side by hook or by crook. And then if the school side's gonna increase by more than that, they're gonna have to have an override every time. That would be a stronger policy. I'm not sure I'd be in favor of it, but it'd be a stronger policy than the notion that you can still make this kind of a transfer if by some measure you decide you don't really need it.
So there's two pieces to that. Number one, you said the magic words, the warrant committee guidance, which has been ignored year after year. So first off, we already know that doesn't work. Part of the other piece of this that I think got us confused this year to start with was that the driver of the override that the warrant committee was on board with, and I think we would have ultimately been on board with, was driven off explosive growth in the town and school employee benefits budget. So there's another piece of this that basically says, you know, we've always looked at it as just town and school, and then town has had all of these town-wide budgets that are on top of it that we all try to work from. This thing basically says, we need to recognize certain components of the budget are not just, you don't get to decide. They are whatever they are. So if we have an explosive growth in the town and school employee benefits budget, that's not anything you're making a decision about, that's not in the short run anyway. That's just something that's going to hit your budget. You have to face that.
Well, you can reduce your head count.
Well, that's in the longer run.
In the short
I'm
run,
saying
too.
I
mean, obviously, you can't just lay off people who are taking benefits now, right? So but you can always do that. I mean, that's a function of how many people you're employing. So if you want to make that lower, you can say, we're just going to lay off 15%, 15 or 20%.
My point is
That's
that
not-
on the operating.
It's not like a debt payment.
Fine, you can lay people off on an annual basis if you don't like the town school budget and figure out how that works. My point is that all of that stuff has been folded into an operating budget, and then we fold all these non-discretionary things in with the discretionary things, and we try to hit a target. Rather than saying, take all the non-discretionary stuff out, and what's left is the target for the
Yeah,
operating
that's
budgets.
fine.
That's the front part of this thing. Now, the only other part of it is building in some integrity between what percent of our town budget will be devoted to the town and what percent of our town budget will be devoted to the schools. If the schools or the town can't live with that, then they're gonna come up with an override requirements. And this is only on the operating side. All the other stuff is not anybody, it doesn't get allocated to anybody. So it becomes instead of a percentage, which is a number pulled out of the air, it becomes a real number based on the real projections of revenue. So it's a true target that has backing to it. And it's not that you can never have an override. It's not that if at the end of this whole process, one side or the other, I don't think you're gonna see this happen, to be honest. I don't think you'll see one side or the other suddenly say, gee, we've got $100,000 that we don't need right away, but it's possible. There are town budgets that don't grow, they just stay flat from year in and year out, so it's possible that could in fact be the case. And it may be that we don't want 35, 65, that we want some other number, but my point is, at some point, the way we're going right now, the schools become an ever greater percentage of our town budget. It doesn't stop. And so I'm trying to basically at least put visibility over what's growing and what's not growing. And then the taxpayers can make a decision whether they like that or not, rather than jumbling it all together and going, gee, our budget's just going up. It's not. The distribution is not staying the same. And if that's not the subject of a financial policy, then I don't know why we're doing all the rest of the stuff. And to be honest, I don't know why the entire town wouldn't embrace this. If there's no restraint, you can do what you need to do. It's just it puts.
Yeah, and I don't object to it.
Yeah.
I don't object to it. I mean, I need to think more about whether it accomplishes anything other than just a matter of presentation, right? I mean, it's
Well,
just-
so to be clear what it accomplishes, it takes the stuff that's not discretionary off the top at the beginning, so we don't sit there and waste our time thinking about that. And it pulls the warrant committee and the town administrator out of an arduous job of trying to figure out how to reconcile two sides of the town budget, only 1/3 of which is either under the control or under the influence of either the warrant committee or the town administrator. It basically says, you want to do the job, you can make your recommendation, but you are not the one that has to figure out how to hammer this into something that presumably is palatable, because quite frankly, the taxpayers have indicated that we're comfortable making that decision on our own.
And it's that agreement on that 65-35 or whatever the split's gonna be, that I think is the essential part,
Right.
the important part of this. just going forward, that we'll have a plan that this is how we're gonna do it.
I picked 65-35 because that's what Millis said they use. So, and that's,
Yeah, and that's pretty
we,
close to
we in
what
round
we
numbers,
do.
we say 1/3, 2/3 here, and it's actually gone up to, I think, 68% this past year. But that's Millis's split. If you don't like that split, let's just decide how the town wants to configure itself between schools and town. And that then will have implications on both sides for what services are provided by either the schools or the town. But at least we're being honest and we're being objective and we're being disciplined. And I'm happy, I realize I sprung this on you tonight, so.
No, I mean,
I'm happy to give some time to mull this over.
No.
We need to figure this out by October.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't have a problem with it as a framework.
Yeah.
Right, but I don't think it, I think it's a better presentation of the budget choices that we have. I think taking the employee benefits and all of those things and taking them out of just their positioning on the warrant tracking sheet, it's not the same kind of category. And so I think that layout of it is correct. I think you're still gonna end up in a situation where the town administrator is trying to avoid an override and trying to decide, do we really need this or not really need this?
I don't think the town administrator should waste any time trying to avoid a school override. The town administrator has no control over the budget for the schools. So why is the town administrator, what does the town administrator do? I'm not, if you're talking about making decisions about stabilization fund or free cash allocations, I got that. But what does the town administrator do on the town operating budget side to try to make that work, other than shortchange the town side?
No, I understand that, if we think we're not spending enough on the town side. That's sort of, if the idea is we're not spending enough on the town side because we've been trying to make this work, then that's sort of a substantive point to be addressed, right? From a presentation standpoint, it's a superior presentation, because it honestly sets out kind of what the choices are. And we're gonna end up kind of in the same spot, we landed in the same spot we did last year, right? I mean, the town budget was essentially fully funded without an override last year, and the school budget required an override. So without this process, we landed where we landed in the same place with this process.
Well,
Because, I don't know what the exact percentage of, of that remaining, if you take that remaining, $700,000, I don't know what the split was on that remaining how would it have played out last year? What would that
between
split have been?
the 700?
So
You're talking
you
about the-
take out the increase in the employee benefits was about 600,000. So the amount that you would have in this system here, as you bounced it through, the waterfall, would be about $700,000. And how was that $700,000 split in last year's budget?
I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. I think generally speaking, 2/3 of the town employees are school, 1/3 is town. So of that 700,000, if you let me make it 750,000, which I think is higher than it was, I would say about $250,000 was town, about $500,000 was schools.
Right, so about 2/3, 1/3.
Yeah.
Right, so I mean, I think this actually, this follows what we actually did this year, not as well presented as this. In other words, we landed doing the same thing this year.
Had we
Had we
followed, followed the warrant committee's recommendation.
had we had this in place last year,
Yep,
right,
yep.
we would have landed in the same place that we did.
I'm not sure, I'm not following you, because
So-
we approved $3.2 million in overrides.
Right, but.
I'm not sure we would've-
But take aside, but you'd have planned new dedicated operating override, that would go up there for the stabilization fund. You'd have the planned new capital override for, the townwide master plan, and.
And there would have been some smaller number, and then that would have all been taken out.
Right, that would all
And
been
that would have-
here,
and that
and
would
so
have
all
been
I'm
left
saying
less.
is, and this is an argument in favor of this presentation, because I think what happened last year is we got deep into the budget process before people, both on the school side and the warrant committee and us, kind of peeled it apart and said, well, wait a second, okay? Why is it looking the way it's looking? It's looking the way it's looking is just because and I kept hammering on this even when we were doing the questionnaire, right? Is because the employee benefits budget has traditionally been a town budget, right? And so that's a big improvement in the presentation of this by moving it up here.
Right.
Substantively, and I think this will bolster your point, that why would anybody oppose this? Substantively, if we had done it this way last year, we would have landed where we did, right? You would have taken that remaining 750, 250 would have gone to the town, 500 would have gone to the schools, and then we would have had what we had, which was a significant school operating.
I'm having a hard time following all the details, but I agree we would wound up with a
Well, but
significant
that's
school
what-
override.
But the way that
So
just the way this
I-
works in
yeah.
practice, right?
Yeah.
You start with all of our revenues, right? You start with the revenues,
Yep.
you pull out our fixed expenditures. And
Yep.
you sort of pick some of the things, some of these fixed expenditures live in what are described as town budgets.
Mhm.
Some of these, like MSH maintenance, are special articles, but you're making this really.
And same thing is true of the capital budget.
Right, which is a better way to do it, right?
Yeah.
So so instead of having this exist before you know, with the operating budget, this comes out first, then you're
Right.
taking out town and school employee benefits. This is the biggest change,
Mhm.
because this has always been listed as a town budget,
Right.
right? So like when you do the calculation, this is what I was fighting with Christina about on that sheet, is saying, well, the town budget is up 3.8%.
Mhm.
It wasn't, right? It was up 3.8% only because we have kind of mischaracterized the employee benefits budget as a town budget as
Right.
opposed to a shared budget, right?
Right.
So that's an improvement in putting that there. So you take that money out, that this past year was $595,000, so that
Mhm.
would have come out
Mhm.
there. Okay, debt service, that just is what it is, capital budgets, we didn't have the stabilization fund this year, we
Mhm.
had,
Mhm.
take out the 400,000.
That incidentally, on the capital budget also allows, if the way it's structured there, we would then make a policy decision on capital, over and above the stabilization fund. We would then have a policy decision around capital spending over and above that,
Right.
which would show up there at the top.
Right, which we already have an agreement
Yeah,
here,
right.
that this comes out before the operating budget,
Right.
right? Because under this system, the capital budget, instead of being decided at
Right.
the end, we decide at the beginning,
Right.
right? So, I'm with you. So, and then, so the capital comes out, then again, you'd be moving the special articles up here, up front,
Mhm.
and then you'd be left with where we were this year, which was $700,000.
Mhm.
And essentially, the way it worked out is 250, 250 went to the town, and the town needed a $130,000 operating override. And 500 went to the schools, and the schools needed a $1.6 million override.
Well, I agree with the two override amounts. The accounting, I'm just, it's not that
Yeah,
important.
all I'm saying is that this would have gotten us to understanding the issues sooner.
I think so.
Because
Yes,
I
think so.
think, and this was true for me, a lot of the confusion in the budget process last year was around the impact of that
Mhm.
town employee benefit number,
Mhm.
which was designated as a town budget, right? And when Mike would send around his thing on the update, the increase, well, how the heck
Mhm.
are the town budgets up 4%? I look at, DPW was down, some of them were
Mhm.
down, I mean, you look at the operating budgets, they're all about a 2%
Right.
increase.
Right.
And
I-
maybe they should have been more, right? But I think even doing it this way, we're not gonna have more money for the town side,
Mhm.
right? Most likely.
I'd be curious to see how that works out. I actually think you might. Uh, Given that I pulled, again, recognizing that the town and school employee benefits has now been pulled off the town side.
Right.
Given that town side there the town operating budget would still have the 2.5%, or it's actually not 2.5%, it's whatever didn't get sucked up in the other stuff, that drops down to the town target. Now, if you have big growth in things like the town and school employee benefits, you could wind up with a target for the operating budgets that didn't grow at 2.5%.
Oh, yeah, you always
In
will.
fact, you probably, well, yeah, if you have greater than 2.5% growth, net and all those other things that
Right.
we've talked out,
I mean,
you're
last year,
you're
employee
correct.
benefit budgets
Right.
were up
Right,
considerably,
right.
right?
But I think first off, when we talk about capital budgeting, we always talk about, well, the capital budgeting is the afterthought, and I think the point of this financial policy is to make it not the afterthought. This is a structure that makes it not the afterthought. When we talk about wanting to get better visibility over things like employee costs, that's bringing that visibility into the employee cost, and I do agree, I put the OPEB in as a question mark, because OPEB funding has been an annual article, and so every year we've approved OPEB funding as one of the articles. This is actually proposing moving the OPEB on as a permanent budget item that we just automatically fund. Just gonna make sure that we've done that in a proper way to transition from an annual allocation to a permanent allocation.
And I think this is where the school confusion came as well, right? Because the school was under the impression that, whatever Dr. Marsden's original budget number was, that it would not require an override, right? That was the impression that they had, and I think it was a sincerely felt view that they had. I don't think they were off on it. Their view was, if we hit this number, we won't need an override. And I think that's because of the way the budgets were presented, in the way the benefits number was, where it was stuck. I think that's why that confusion.
Plus, it's the way we've operated, which is, well, we will manage our budget each year that you know, we can deliver 4% to you, and we'll figure out how to suck up all the rest of it outside of the schools. And so now that's become the normal conversation is, oh, if we have this, you know, if you give us this override, then we don't need an override anymore. It's like, you're not the one that's preventing the override. You actually do get an override every year when you get 4%.
Right.
Because you're 1.5% over the 2.5 limit.
Right.
It's that the rest of the town side is, or the debt side, in fairness, the debt side as well. Because if the debt, like right now, we're on a downtrend in debt, which
Right.
means every year until we load in more debt, that actually has lessened the impact on our taxes.
Although it doesn't help us as much as it seems. Because about a huge chunk of that is paid by the MSBA money. Which was the impact of the
Yeah,
taxpayer.
well, when we get to the schools, I'm talking about right now, our debt profile, we're retiring debt faster than we're adding debt, for right now.
Oh, right.
And for the next couple of years, that will work to the benefit of taxpayers.
Right.
But that's a separate thing, that's debt.
Right.
That's not, are we operating within those limits? The thing that I do object to is when the schools are saying, we won't need an override, but what we mean when we say that is you give us 4%, you figure out where to take that out of
Right.
the town side, and then you won't need an override. That just says as long as the town's willing to endure the pain, then go as long as you want without an override. And the problem is, take 4% of 2/3 of the budget, you get 8/3, that's 2 2/3%. There's no answer, that's not zero fund the town. That actually says the town has to keep decreasing because 2 2/3 is greater than 2.5. I'm using some crude math here, but basically 2 2/3% is greater than 2.5%. The only way that works is if the town goes downhill. And the more it goes downhill, the greater the disparity between the two percentages, and the town has to pay even more to hold that. And I'm not trying to not allow that, you know, I'm saying basically this provides the visibility. So the
Yeah, no, I think
taxpayers can
that's what
make
I'm-
the decision
I'm
about
saying
whether
that
they
this
want to
is-
do that.
And I'm saying that I agree with that.
Okay.
And so I've come
Okay.
around, I've talked
Okay.
myself into
Okay.
it.
Okay.
And I think it's less of a change than I thought it was at the outset. I would like Mike Sullivan's view on it.
Yeah.
Just because I think this is fundamentally a change in the, for lack of a better term, that layout in the front
Mhm.
page of the warrant book that's been done, and the warrant tracking sheet. You know what I mean? I think this is a different way of laying that out, sort of move some things that are currently in the operating budget, and I think it should be, right? I think keeping the employee benefits where they are, I think it does lead, I think it misled everybody this year. I think everybody was under an inaccurate impression of what was possible, given what that number was. When it was never the case that, I mean, given that of the entire increase, the $1.3 million of the 2.5% plus new growth, half of that, or 45% of that, was always being eaten up by employee benefits. It was never possible to even have a 3% increase in the school budget without override. I mean, that was the reality, and that's why when we finally got down to calculating what the override would be with the warrant committee budget, everyone was sort of shocked by it. And I think that's because of the way it was laid out, that it wasn't clear that even to get to a 2.5% increase in the school budget this year would have required an override. That's the reality. You could not have had a 2.5% increase in the school
Yeah,
budget.
and in fairness, the warrant committee recognized with their recommendation, that was an override recommendation, just wasn't at
But
1.67
even,
million.
I think even
So
fairness,
yeah.
the warrant committee, I don't think they recognized that as soon as they could have.
So Mike has this.
Maybe Jack did,
yeah.
but I certainly, you know.
So Mike has this, I gave it to him last week, asked him to review it, because I think I got it 95% there from the accounting standpoint. I do think there may be a cross thread around the enterprise funds. I think, to be honest, I think you could debate on item 5 here, where there's funds reserved for special articles. When I was on the warrant committee, we always put those up front, assuming the articles all passed.
Right.
Which was a conservative way to hold everything else, to keep it under, and then if an article didn't pass, then you wound up actually with an unused buffer. But if somebody, you know, we could think about that one and say, well, is that where do we want to put all the articles that have funding requirements there and reserve against all of them, or do we want to handle it? There's a few things that could be adjusted in here, but the basic idea of basically shifting from a percentage number that's kind of picked early in the process when we really don't have a grasp of the details, and instead going through this kind of a process that gets you to a number that's the actual number that you're targeting. I think it just provides better rigor and visibility, and it still allows for overrides. It's just that it's clearer where the overrides are coming in, and taxpayers decide what they will about whether they want the override or not.
No, I think it's a more straightforward presentation of it, and I think we should try to, turn this into a replacement for that layout, or a supplement to that layout, right? So in other words, like, you're thinking of the presentation in the warrant book, you've got the page with the history and the new revenue and all that, but I think moving the benefits out of the operating budgets. I mean, it is an operating budget in that it's recurring, but as you say, it's non-discretionary. And even if you were to engage in layoffs, you would reduce somewhat, right? But if you laid off 20 people, and all those were 20 people who didn't take health insurance, you haven't saved yourself any money on your benefits, right? I mean, you haven't, and you obviously can't discriminate based on income.
So back to the policy, I had envisioned this being incorporated in this policy because this policy is calling on us to change the way we do some things, especially around the capital funding. This is a way for implementing that change. Otherwise, if we don't have something like that, then, we say we're gonna do something, but there's no real practical mechanism for making that happen. And the way we've been doing it is we put the capital funding at the tail end of the.
Right, well, this already puts it first.
But
Process.
at a conceptual level, it does. This puts it at a it actually is, from an administrative standpoint, this says, okay, well, here's how you put it first.
Right.
It will literally take it right off the top.
Well, but then also, from a calendar standpoint, it's first in that, once the selectmen and the school committee have endorsed the capital budget, that's the number that goes in the budget.
Yeah.
Right, so you're gonna build the operating budgets around that commitment to capital, as opposed to throwing the capital budget sort of each year into the washing machine in February, when it's been too easy to just say, well, we could, we had 500, we had 550, well, we can go with 4, we'll go with 350, right? So one of the ways we've done that too is by cutting out capital we should be spending, right? And so that,
So my point, now that I slammed you a while, now that we've had this conversation, I think this is useful as part of our financial policy document because it's talking about how we will go about budgeting. I think at this level and in this conversation, this is a conversation among the three of us. As Jack and Tom and Mike already know, the warrant committee has access to this, and the warrant committee will make its own decisions about how it wants to issue its guidance. I think this has merit. If you don't believe the school committee would accept that, I would be worried about how they view this document, whether that's in there or not. But now that we've had this conversation, I'm not insisting that be part of this. If you want to vote on this, I'm ready to vote on it. I think there's value to building that and incorporating in as a section of this on budgeting, but I'm not going to fall on my sword on that piece. But I would be worried if there's something about this that's a problem, then we have a bigger problem than just how we're going about budgeting.
no, look, and I think I probably was too hasty in saying that. I think as I've thought through it and talked through it, I don't think, they may object to it, but,
So your call. We'll
yeah,
vote on that whenever you want it.
I would like to get this adopted.
Okay.
I would like to get, because I do think, not that it's the only use of it, I think one of the best uses of this layout is, it should go in the warrant report. You know what I mean? This should be one of the ways of laying out, because I think,
It makes it easier to.
as much as, I think this.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, sort of a summary of it, and I think, just in terms of a layout, with the caveat that, because I think one of the points that you made, and one of the things we need to talk about on our side, is compensation for our employees on the side.
Yeah.
Right, and
Yep.
making sure that, we're not shortchanging,
Right.
our employees who are not part of collective bargaining units. And so, of the things you had raised previously, that's something that resonates with me as well. And I think we also have to be focused on bit of accountability and you know, recognizing that, and this is a private sector view, Christine, you can look down your nose.
Did you
at
see me
it,
cringing?
You know, kind of, you know, but recognizing, you know, that.
Right.
With that is a certain measure of accountability you don't necessarily have otherwise. So I think that's,
That-
in
it's-
terms of the
yeah.
allocation of the revenue. I think the reality is that, you know, this is gonna be academic just because of the employee benefit. I think it's
Well-
gonna make this go down a lot easier because it's kind of is what it is.
To your point about the warrant report, the way I got to this fundamental structure was when I was trying to figure out for those 2 information sessions that I did at the center. I was trying to figure out, how do you explain the entire budget to the people who show up at these information sessions in a way that people can get their arms around? That's how I got to that structure. It was
Right.
like trying to distill everything we have down to understandable components. And then after I did, it's like, actually, I understand our budget better now. And I was looking back over this past year, looking at some of the conversations we had, and said, you know, the reason it was as confusing as it was is because we didn't have the thinking organized.
Right. No, I think this is a good way to lay it out. So I mean, I would like to adopt this.
Okay.
But I don't wanna say that we're not gonna adopt this.
There's always a policy, so the first thing is I want to make sure that it doesn't get swept under the rug, but even policies can always be changed and modified. So if in fact this has legs, we can always append something. So,
So let me ask you a couple of questions, if we're getting back to your policy, Mike, then. Under the capital items, your 6th one, other items with a useful life of more than 5 years and costing more than 25,000. I wondered if it should be 5 years or costing more than 25,000.
Okay.
And then the other one that struck me was under your reserves and free cash, and I wasn't sure that 2.5% in the last 2 paragraphs of the total annual expenditures, so that reserve accounts have to be at least 2.5%. And these are hard lines, I guess.
2.5% is a hard line, the rest of it is a goal, right?
And so
well,
2.5%.
in that last paragraph, we changed, Pete, if you remember, we said the target on the free cash was 2.5% of the total annual budget. So that basic, because we had that discussion that said, well, if you make it that it can never go below 2.5%, effectively, what you're doing is you're taking 2.5% of your, you know, free cash is not really free cash, because you can't tap it. But if you make it 2.5% of the budget, which is you'll never plan to let the free cash go below 2.5%, then in an emergency, you can do it, but your plan should never allow that.
All right, well, so that's, all right, you guys understand the budgeting way better than I do, so that was my issue.
Yep.
If it's a hard line at 2.5%, and to me, that's like 1.6 million, are we binding ourselves in a way that we don't want to be bound? Because if that's something that we need to provide services that year, are we preventing ourselves from dipping into that 1.6 million by this policy that's drawing a hard line?
So not
I
in the
guess that's
last
my
paragraph,
question.
for sure. I thought the paragraph in front of that wasn't a problem because it talked about total reserves. It's not just the free cash account, it's total reserves, which says I don't think we'd ever want our total reserve accounts to fall below 2.5%.
That's a pretty low
Just,
number.
yeah, just from a credit
Is it?
standpoint.
All right.
2.5% is pretty low.
They want to see 5 to 10 typically.
Yeah.
That was a pretty low.
Well, we've got a goal here of 9 to 12.
Right. So what we were saying there is we would just never let all of the reserve accounts go below 2.5%, which seemed pretty safe. But we wouldn't let the free
So-
cash the target for free cash in our plan ever go below 2.5% of the total budget.
Which again is about
Yeah.
a million.
And we saw that play out when we were getting ready for this town meeting. We hadn't passed this yet, but we had the 1 3/4 million target that Mike was trying to maintain.
Right,
But
and-
with the
and
balanced
there was no way to
budget,
get there.
we dropped it to, I think, 1.3.
So
we
how would
actually
that-
wound up-
We didn't, but that's what it came out to.
So how would that work with this? Because if it ends up at 1.3, which is below our hard line here, then,
If we adopt this, we won't let it do that.
You won't go to the
Right,
one.
and that's
we
why
won't
it's in
allow
the-
that to happen.
And that's why it's in the proposed budget. In other words, town meeting can do it at once.
Right.
Town meeting can make it higher or lower, and we give the proposed budget. And I think,
oh, I
think
see,
we're
on the
supposed to
proposed
switch
budget,
the
okay.
town's total annual expenditures to the town total annual budget.
Yeah,
That
well,
means
we
that-
did on the last one, maybe it was both of them?
Well, it should be, I think it should be the same. I mean, I had
Okay,
originally
yeah, I'm
used
okay
total
with that.
annual expenditures, because that's the term Mike uses for the all-in
Yeah,
amount. I'm happy to also say total annual budget either way. It's the bottom line total spending, is what, 2.5% of that. which this year was
So,
$69
well, just so we're
million.
clear on those two paragraphs, so the next to the last paragraph talks about reserves, including free cash.
Yeah,
Should not be permitted to fall below 2.5% of the town's total annual expenditures. This last one is just free cash, is not allowed to go below 2.5% of the total annual budget, which is the plan. So they're, as it's written right now, they're looking at two different things. I think it would be more likely that we would be tempted to want to, what happens, that last paragraph, what it does is it basically puts a stake in the ground that says, we will not use free cash to reduce an override amount by anything more than we could reduce it, keeping free cash balance at 2.5% of the budget. So we wouldn't be able, and you know, I've learned from these regional selectmen's meetings, some of the free cash balances in some of these towns, it's like $60,000. It's not anything close to what we have. They have other reserve accounts, so it's not quite that dire, but I was a little shocked to hear the kind of free cash balances that they had were incredibly low.
some towns do it a little, sometimes
They do
they're
it, yeah.
bigger, like reserve funds.
That's all, I think
you know,
that's
kind of
it,
for
but,
free cash.
yeah,
I think sometimes the way we use free cash, some towns use your reserve funds.
maybe, although free cash makes sense. It's your operating capital.
Well, and the other thing is, it's more disciplined, he's gonna pay it back,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
if you sort of have a
Yeah.
reserve fund, let's say our reserve fund was $700,000.
Yeah.
Instead of, right now, we sort of borrow from free cash and pay it back
Yeah,
for a short-term cash need.
Yeah.
You could make your reserve fund bigger, but then it's just gone.
Yeah.
As opposed to borrowing, just, cause I think Georgia uses it now
Georgia uses
to
it.
smooth out
Mhm.
cash flow.
Yeah,
But not, at the end of the year, you still net back to spend
Right.
less than if you had, if you had, you know, if you had
Right.
appropriated it to a reserve.
Right, that's how she's spending the Affordable Housing Trust
Right.
until she borrows.
So if we add the
Okay.
or there, and then I think we're okay in that reserve and free cash section.
Okay, all right.
You wanna adopt
Right.
this and we can sign it,
Okay.
Chris, we can make that change, we'll sign
I'll
it
make the
next
change.
time.
I move that we accept or adopt the Town of Medfield financial policies with the minor edits that we just discussed this evening.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yep.
All right, we're gonna talk town administrator search process or board of selectmen goals. Oh,
Chance for citizen comment on the issue?
who's the citizen?
No, the right answer is I don't know. All depends what you want to say, Jack.
The gentleman in the back row, Mr. Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Selectman Marcucci and Chairman Marcucci. Two comments and a couple of suggestions. First comment is, let me strongly support what you're thinking about in terms of the budget presentation. For a number of years, the town side has been subsidizing the school side of the budget. And I think that's something that we need to kind of consider and stop. We tend to be underfunding the town and generously funding the school budget. The second piece is this provides a clear separation, both in terms of presentation and choice for our town folks on what they would like to have on both sides of this. So I think there are great advantages to this presentation. Third piece, I disagree with one part of the presentation, which is that the fringe benefit budget, to me, is a variable expense. It is not a fixed expense. It is a function of the number of personnel that we have. It is a clear choice, and it should be at the very end, coupled with the school and the town operating budgets. Those are choices, not necessarily fixed expenses. And the last piece is, has the warrant committee got a chance to provide any input relative to your new financial policy?
Which one, the one we just adopted?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the draft that's been kicking around since February.
Okay. Somehow, the oldest of the warrant committee members doesn't remember. That would be,
I don't remember what the feedback was, but I think it was, you know, this draft was provided and.
okay, I don't remember a warrant committee discussion in and around it. Not that I think, I do vaguely remember seeing a draft of it at one point in time. Not that I think it was a bad document.
Yeah, I think I definitely got feedback from a warrant committee member. I thought multiple ones.
And didn't we review it at the joint meeting we have at the warrant committee, the
We
school
did,
committee? Okay,
yeah.
Did we? Okay.
yeah,
Well, there was not an extended discussion of it.
no.
The warrant committee was not voluble during that meeting.
Was it done at this time of night?
No, probably about 2.5 hours earlier. All right.
Jack, could I just react to Jack's, that last comment about the, you're right, that those benefits, particularly benefits that are accruing to active employees they're not fixed. The issue, I think, though, is that, as I look at it, is while that's true, I think we would make decisions about employment in town not based on, gee, we're $500,000 over this year, I guess we just have to cut X number of heads, let's go figure out where. You could do that, but as a town, in terms of just the way we operate, I don't think that's how we've chosen to do business. I do think building more visibility into the cost of hiring new employees is a big deal. It's just that I think that would put, it would put the town on a different footing to basically just say, well, each year we see what the numbers come out to be, and if the numbers are higher than what we want them to be, and they're higher than what we'd like as an override, we're gonna lay off 12 people. Maybe we'll hire you back next year, maybe we won't. I think that's hard for our town to do, at least with the town the way we are.
Gus, I was thinking of actually the other side of that issue, okay? This is a document that could be used as a pro forma document to present budget options, okay? If so, those budget options are often personnel options. And we ought to aggregate together the operating piece and the fringe piece when we put those together. That is something the town has not done in the past. And I think it is a valuable presentation piece. So don't think of it just for the fact that we're gonna cut that. Think of it of giving the people in the town clear visibility of, you make a choice to add 3 new X employees, okay? You also add this to the fringe benefits.
I thought there is one way to possibly do that in this context, which is that when either the town side or the school side is thinking about hiring people, that in the operating budget, there's not just the operating budget, but there's actually a new hire section. And that new hire section not only has the increase in the salary budget that will be folded in to the operating budget, but actually has all those supplementary costs. So that in the year of an addition, you actually highlight what the total cost of that, and it shows up under the operating side. Then after that, it's gonna fold into that. So I hear what you're saying. I'm trying to figure out how to make it work. If you simply allocate the benefits out to all the departments, it's almost hard to see that, you don't realize that the benefits went up 600,000 last year. You say, oh, these benefits went up 200,000 and these benefits went up 400,000. And it's almost like the numbers seem smaller. So I understand what you're saying, and I agree with the point you're trying to accomplish. That might be one way to do it at the margin around what the full impact of a staffing increase is.
Yeah. Just seems to me that A, it truly is a variable cost, and B, both on the downside and the upside, for presentation purposes, I think it can clearly help us understand options.
Okay. Next, town administrator selection process or board of selectmen goals. Do you have a preference where to go next?
I forgot my selectman goals. Apparently, I worked on it and I just didn't bring a copy.
Well, I made up for it by misspelling my name on mine, so.
I like yours, even with your name misspelled.
So the three of us did 3 different things. I took the town goals as they've been on the town website. And then if you recall, when we were working to finalize the goals, we pulled off the near-term goals, the current year goals, just to simplify it to the 2 columns. I've built those, I'll put that 3rd column back in. It's slightly different. So I basically reconcile what we have on the town website with what we had with the version of this before I got rid of the 3rd column, and I've mapped them back in here. The one that I think went away was the road management plan, because that was a goal and we accomplished it last year. So I did this mechanically. I didn't try to be creative on anything. And Mike, I'd be happy to take yours and see if I can map them on here as well.
Please keep all my typos, though. If you
I will
would.
do that, so we can recognize the new goals.
When
and
I'm looking
differences.
at this MS Planning Committee chart, I have no idea what that is. I think it's the Master Planning Committee chart, but
Yep,
anyway.
yep. So,
So that's fine.
so that might be, if you'd like, I can, that kind of gets, that'll get us to,
Yep. Well, that was a short discussion.
yeah, I think,
You want me to continue that for the 31st?
Put that in for the 31st, yeah.
yep.
Would you like to get rid of one troublesome member of the congregation here? If you would. No. Oh, Bill Massaro was
If
gonna,
you figured out a way to make Bill leave, please let us know.
not at all. Bill is
Which
one of
pew
my
might that
favorites,
troublesome member be?
okay? All right? But I would volunteer to leave if you would like to just switch to the MSH item before doing your next item.
Well,
Is that
we
a possibility?
actually covered the MSH
Oh, they've done it.
item.
Yes.
We did. We kind of, in the middle of our annual appointments, we had an extended discussion of the MSH issue.
Right.
And could I inquire as to the result?
You could.
You have to come here. If you want to know what we do, it'll be on YouTube.
So
I gotta
think,
wait for the video.
We didn't talk about water and sewer, however.
we did not talk about water and sewer. What we agreed to do, coming back for a meeting on the 31st, the view of the board was that the board wants to get input from developers via an RFI before having a vote on the zoning at MSH at a special town meeting. To that end, between now and the 31st, the individual members of the board individually will be reaching out to contacts that they have of real estate professionals in town to inquire about their willingness to serve on an implementation committee that would be responsible for the issuance and evaluation of the RFIs. We reappointed the Medfield State Master Planning Committee through the conclusion of their work on the master plan, zoning, and et cetera. And we're going to reconvene on the 31st to discuss further the RFI issue and the potential appointment of this development committee, depending on the interest of people who are real estate professionals and serving on that committee. Alternatively, we're also going to think about whether, if we're not able to staff a committee the way we'd like to, whether we would get some professional assistance in issuing and evaluating that RFI one way or the other. Is that a fair summary of?
That sounds like the Board of Selectmen has acted wisely again.
I don't know. I've called on you twice tonight, Jack, so I'm not sure how wise we are.
So let me again ask my question, though. When do you plan to address the question of looking at a rough approximation of water needs?
I can try that one if you want. I think, you appreciate the emails that you sent, Jack. I actually, from my perspective, the real issue is the Water and Sewer Board needs to look at the information that's in the state hospital master plan. I think in thinking about what Bill had to say at the last meeting, I think Bill's looking for a level of accuracy and specificity in the estimate that goes beyond the master planning. So the bottom line is, it's 150,000 gallons per day of water that's required by the state hospital, as estimated by Kathy McCabe and the Master Planning Committee. The question for Bill is, does your water system feeding the state hospital campus have 150,000 gallons per day extra capacity or not? And then we can figure out the same thing around the sewer. Either we have a system problem or we don't have a system problem. I know Bill was worried about surge capacity and stuff like that, but at this point, either we can give them a number to shoot for, or let's just get the basic number figured out. And then I think there's another issue around the tubular well field, but that's a source issue, not a
The other issue
transmission.
is, if there are costs to the town, let's get those costs into the town impact of the
Yeah.
development of the hospital.
Yeah.
If there are
Yeah.
costs.
Yeah.
I'm not using it as an argument against
Right.
the plan.
Right.
I'm just saying, let's not, this is the same
Yeah.
problem I have with the 440 units. Let's make sure we're identifying all of the costs and the impact
Right.
to the town
Right.
when we're doing our calculations of what the net benefit is.
Yeah.
So Christian Carpenter offered to meet and try to figure this out with some other people that have been involved, and I suggest that we ask him to go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
Good. Gus, just a quick comment on it, okay? We need more than the 150,000, I think, to approximate this. You need a peak for the summer, and you need a low for the winter to band that. And to Bill's point, I think if there are infrastructure costs other than direct hospital costs associated with this, then I think we need to think about those too. So I would just say that Pete's thought of having Christian and a few others just meet and cursorily look at this would be a helpful thing to
I'm
do.
in total agreement. The only part that baffles me is why it takes the Board of Selectmen to suggest that between the water and sewer and the state hospital. And I recognize.
Don't
that
ask.
Okay. Well,
Don't
that-
ask.
But that is my point. It's like, it's really nice that there's a problem out there. Why do you have to come to a Board of Selectmen meeting to have somebody say, hey, why don't you guys sit down and talk? I do have a question for you if you happen to know. You talked about the peak, I picked up from Bill talking about wanting to know peak demand and all that. The question I have is, did the State Hospital Master Planning Committee or Kathy McCabe actually estimate peak? Because I'm guessing if they didn't estimate peak, then the information is not going to come from the Master Planning Committee. I would think that the water and sewer departments could look and say, well, we know what the variation is between, whether it's the park, we know how the demand varies, and we're going to use 250,000 gallons per day as the peak. I don't know if that's the right number, but if I had to pick a number, I'd pick that number.
Yeah.
Can I
I'm going to turn this over to Bill in just a second, but the answer is, I don't know that. Bill may, okay? But whatever information we have, Kathy has, and we need to have access to her in this process.
Yeah.
I mentioned this last week. The problem is we don't know what information McCabe has when she came up with her 120,000 to 150,000 gallons. And
We
the
know it's a
same-
lot higher than DCAM
we
originally
I know
estimated.
it's a ton, but again, I could make a rational explanation or understanding of why that possibly is. It's 30% commercial versus what was something like 10% commercial for the prior use that DCAM was projecting. You use more water. But we don't have the breakouts. Now, I asked for those breakouts in January after the meeting with water and sewer. And because I also asked for what's the head count, how many people are you projecting for residents, and everything else, and that information was never supplied. Now, we're waiting for backup to the numbers that are in the master plan. I don't know what's in there.
And we're supposed to get those within the next 2 weeks or so, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, all right, so I tend to look at the dark side of things a lot. I would suspect that we're not going to get that kind of information. I think we're going to need somebody to look at industry standards or whatever the engineering standards are. I'm sure these numbers are available elsewhere. It says because we can come up with a number of people roughly. What's the number? What can we expect, whether it's winter usage or summer usage or whatever, and make a guess. I mean, anything is better than where we are now.
Right.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Massaro.
Thanks, Jack.
Anything else? We're good on water.
Just like to second Pete's suggestion.
Yeah, we're all in favor of a meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll tell them.
And a
to go
bunch of
ahead.
people who aren't here should meet with each other.
Yes.
All right. Well, Bill will go to that meeting. So, all right. Town administrator search process. We left it after our last discussion. We were going to think about it.
Yep.
It is past the bedtime of the elderly.
Good night, Jack.
Thank you for your time as always.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Drive safely.
Don't stay beyond midnight.
So, have we been thinking about this?
Yep.
Okay. Does anyone would like to share the thoughts with the group?
Yep.
Gus?
Curveball. I think the very first issue or first question that we should address before we talk about searches is, and this is really weird in open meetings to have conversations like this, but I think the first question on the table is, should we promote Christine to become the town administrator? My own view on that is First, let me give you just the broad issues. We've replaced a fire chief, we replaced a police chief, we will be replacing a police chief. I would personally think that the town would be better off not bringing in a complete newcomer to the town on the town administration side while we have those things. So that's just kind of at a broad strategic level. I can say, having known Christine for years, but probably in this past year, having worked with her on the ALS study committee, I came away much more aware of her ability to kind of work decisively, deal with some of the things that come up in meetings like that with semi-disruptive people, that actually she went up several notches in my book, in just in terms of her ability to deal with that stuff. We all know how hard she works, so there's no issue around that. It eliminates any kind of a real serious transition issue between her and Mike. What it does is it paints a different picture. If you think of Mike and Christine in the jobs that they've done, Mike has been the financial driver largely, as I perceive it, and Christine in many ways has been the one that's kind of handled the operational oversight of the town. Some of the things that are about how the town operates, I don't think it would be a bad idea to have the town administrator be the person who handles the operational oversight and takes care of some of the cross threads and uncapitalized opportunities that exist with more collaboration between the departments. What that then does is it says that we need an assistant town administrator who has the financial skills to be able to understand, the details of some of the budgeting. Part of me said what that means is that we're recruiting potentially for a young Mike Sullivan coming out of a named school that has the right kind of expertise that would like this, that could actually fill in that side. I think, Mark, you made the comment before, right now, trying to find town administrators with financial strength is actually a pretty hard thing to do. I'm guessing it would be easier for us to find an assistant town administrator who comes in with some financial background that has interest in public administration that could come in, or we may be lucky and we may find that there's a finance director out there that has an interest in coming in which case we've got a pretty powerful combination across the board. With Christine present here, I think it's a job Christine is going to have to grow into. I think that the kind of workload, this is, might as well give you candid feedback. I think sometimes the workload can weigh anyone down to where it's easy to try to get the administratively most expeditious thing done. And I think as a town administrator, you can't get bogged down in that, and you have to step forward. So I'll throw that out again, catching both of you maybe by surprise. Although I looked at it and said, how come that wasn't our first question when we first came up? A town that grows its own and develops its own and can look to its own to get things done, that's a sign of a town that's running well. I think this is an instance where we can look at doing that.
Pete?
Well, I guess I had thought that maybe if we conducted a search, that somehow that would make Christine's position, if she were appointed the town administrator, a stronger position for, somehow that seemed to make sense to me, because she had competed and had been selected against a variety of people. And so I had thought of that as the way that we were gonna go. So I don't know, I guess, what you're saying sounds like it could make sense, sounds like it could work, and that's always been my concern, that I'm not sure that Mike and Chris have shared the budgeting. I know that I've asked Mike a lot of times to cross-train Chris in the budgeting things, but I don't think he ever did.
Well, he certainly remained as a resource to
I'm
help.
sorry, what?
He would certainly remain as a resource to help.
Yes, yeah, I assume that he would.
Yeah.
I would hope that he would, yeah. And I bet he would have an interest in some sort of consulting arrangement on an ongoing basis.
This is a very weird conversation to have with Christine in the room, but it's
Christine
like,
in the room taking the
it's
minutes of our
open, yeah, taking minutes. Gus had some very insightful things to say about who should become the new town administrator. I was astonished at his wisdom. That's all right, I'll prove it.
Reaction, Gus, to Pete's comment about
The only reaction I have in my whole career, I've been a consultant. I've worked in private industry. And I appreciate, in fact, I appreciate your point, because I think it tells me that part of what was going on in your head was, gee, I think Christine's a good choice, but can we just decide to do that? In private industry, the first place you look is, who do we have that's already demonstrated, who's the bird in the hand that we can count on, that we can promote? If someone was a valid candidate in the companies that I've worked in, and the company decided, we're gonna look first to see what we can find, and then maybe we'll go to you, that doesn't send me a positive confirmation. Just the way I'd react, at least on the private side, would be, you went outside, there must have been a reason you looked out. There must be something you didn't see here that caused you to see if you could find anything better before you came. And I've had 2 weeks to think about it. It's like, you know what? No, I don't think that's what we're likely to do. I actually think this is a good spot. As I said, I think there are challenges associated. I think that Christine would have to grow into it, but this is a place where, unlike the police chief, where some people said, just hand it over to, our chief public safety officers. I think you have to do the rigorous assessment of their technical skills. This is one where I actually think we'd be doing the town a favor to maintain some stability and have a smooth transition, and open up an opportunity for an assistant town administrator to play an important role, and, depending on who we find, to either develop rapidly or fill a slot that could really help us out overall.
So one of the things that I had thought about years ago, and well, not that many years ago, but was that it would be good to integrate the schools and the town budget processes,
Mm-hmm.
and have a financial officer for the town.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that Mike Sullivan kind of liked the idea, but then I think the Mike LaFrancesca and the business office of the schools weren't kind of interested in doing it. So, but this might create some sort of opportunity to.
I'm not familiar of any, there's just too much turf. I don't know of any community. that
Millis
does. Millis?
just did it. Millis is on the cutting edge of doing that.
Wow.
I understand where you come from, Mark.
So I will say, I mean, in thinking about this process initially, I mean, I come at it from sort of the same private sector background that Gus has, right? And so you were at a company and you had someone who'd been president of the company for 20 years and CEO retired. The first decision the board would make is, are we going to promote the president of the company or not, right? And at that point, they should know enough about that person to know whether or not they think they can do the job or not, and you sort of make a yes or a no, and then move on. I mean, I don't know that I knew. I mean, I've just in full disclosure did speak to Christine just to confirm she'd be interested in this. Whether she'd be a candidate
Before we
or
were
not.
on camera.
Before we were on camera, not tonight, because I don't think that had come up before then. I don't think it had been clear when we spoke on the 26th whether Christine was interested or not, and it's obviously up to her. She's indicated to me that she is, and so, I mean, I think the only hesitation I have would be the point that Pete raised, just in terms of would somehow public confidence be less if you didn't do a search? In thinking about it, I think anybody who's dealt with Christine would recognize that she's absolutely qualified to do the job, and I think she knows more about budgeting than people would give her credit for, maybe than we would give her credit for in this discussion. And I do think it would change the position of the assistant town administrator. I do think before we do this, since we just sort of raised it tonight, I think if we're going to go down this route without kind of doing a full-blown search, I think we should dedicate some time in a meeting to kind of talking to Christine about her vision for the job, what she sees as kind of her goals, what she would do that's new, what she would do that is different, just so that it's not kind of it's not purely a rote decision, that it's kind of, we all thought about, this is how it's going to work, this is how it'll be set up. And I think that would be, you're not doing a search, but we are going to do a sort of evaluation in that discussion to kind of understand what she'd be doing. I think that would be something you would do. I think the board would ask, again, to use the private sector, if you're promoting the president to be the CEO, you'd probably still ask the president, okay, what's your plan for the company? If the answer is, I don't really know, I just want to be the CEO, you probably wouldn't hire him or her. But does that make sense?
If I can just throw my 2 cents in, because.
Do you want the job, Mark? Is that the
No, no,
idea?
no. No,
You
no.
have to take the minutes then.
I think you really should be looking for a
I
lawyer
definitely don't-
with a lot of experience.
But I've worked with Christine since she's been here, and what I saw early on was she'd take areas with no experience and rise to the occasion, particularly in the area of labor relations. She's had all of that, the collective bargaining negotiations, the grievances, and frankly, labor relations occupies an inordinate amount of most TA's time, in my experience. And so, and that involves crunching numbers as well, because when you're negotiating the way the statutory criteria apply for the public safety unions anyway, you have to take those numbers and use them as a negotiating basis. So she really has impressed me over the years with her ability to really assimilate new skills and knowledge, and really impressed me. And I think there's a strong financial core that she has here. I think it's up to each TA to structure the government to take advantage of their strengths and whatever. I saw a TA come in and we've gone through a series of TAs in Medway, all very different. One who was an absolute disaster. They went out on a search. They brought in somebody who had strong financial background, but very little experience in municipal administration. But she knew enough to assemble a team and get the support people and get it done. And I think there's enough core here in town to supplement that. And where Mike's strengths were financial, and that's what he wanted to be doing, Christine has her own strengths, and whether that includes budgeting as well, or that's something that could be assigned to an assistant or a comptroller or whoever you want to do it. There's you know, you're gonna, each person's gonna make a mark on the administration.
So I would suggest that we, I mean, does this make sense to you, Pete, process-wise, if we sort of do make the evaluation of Christine and
Sure.
in lieu of a full-blown search? So I would suggest we put that on for a future meeting, for a specific discussion. People may want to come and have a comment on it or whatever. I think this is, I would suggest August 14th.
Okay.
Would that work for you, Christine, to have, 'cause I think we talked about not meeting on August 7th and meeting on the 14th and the 21st in
Yep.
August. Would that be enough time, Christine, for you to put together kind of your thoughts and approach? And does
Definitely.
everyone think that's the right
I
way to
think,
do it?
I do, yeah, I
Okay.
do.
And we'll put that on for the 14th, and Mike may be able to be here as well by that time and all that, so. All right. Well, we've covered all of our discussion items. We can move from discussion to action. So, first item, Maurice Goulet requests the Board of Selectmen to sign the contract for $44,975 with Weston and Sampson for a phosphorus study for the wastewater treatment plant to comply with the DEP administrative consent order. Mark, is this something, have you reviewed this contract?
Actually, I did.
And is the Water and Sewer Board aware of this contract?
They are.
Okay.
That's good, because I didn't know whether they did.
Okay.
I have questions. Sorry.
No?
First off, the contract refers to attachment A, but we didn't get attachment A, which is the scope and payment, unless attachment A is their proposal letter.
I think, isn't
It
the scope of
probably
payment
is.
in the proposal?
So my point is, this is the form, and there's no true attachment A. The proposal letter is there. The issue that I have, so if the proposal letter is attachment A, then the issue, and if you reviewed this, then maybe it's not an issue.
What does it say attachment A is?
It says
It says
attachment A is the scope of work and the
scope of
payment
work.
terms.
That's probably the letter.
So it doesn't, but this doesn't say attachment A, this just came in the email.
Right.
So it doesn't incorporate it doesn't incorporate. If it is attachment A, then the issue is, there's a set of terms and conditions
Those
in
don't
our,
apply.
it says they do. If you
Says
read,
this- Well, theirs does, but our contract doesn't, and our contract takes priority. We do this,
if you look at page 3 in their standard.
I know, Gus,
No,
we're
okay,
only,
as long as
we're
you've
only
looked at it.
incorporating the scope and the payment terms in that, not the whole thing. We do this in Franklin all the time. Somebody sends in something with all their boilerplate and all, and we attach their proposal only as to scope of work and payment terms.
Right, but.
So,
I don't-
which
doesn't
brings me
quite-
back to my original question. I have no idea what attachment A is on this contract. I have this thing, and this thing says no matter what's in the contract, this applies. Now, I'm glad you looked at it, you got it, that's fine. But I don't know what attachment A is. So I'm being asked to approve of the contract that,
And the problem with it, Mark, is that, and I know what you're saying, is that our form does not specifically exclude their terms and conditions, right? I mean, our form says this contract, including all documents incorporated by reference, constitutes the entire agreement.
and their terms and conditions say,
Are in
despite
the-
what
right,
a
at
contract
least
says.
the
There's
way
any
this-
there's conflict language in ours, though, it says in the event of conflict, the terms in this control, it's right at the end of the first paragraph, I think.
Yeah, the problem is,
It's, this is the engineering firm that's already running the plant under a
Yeah.
contract.
So that was another question I had. This is, if you go to page 3 of the contract, item B, which is termination for convenience, says this includes in the event in which the town hires a full-time employee as WWTP chief operator and the services of the contract are no longer needed in this capacity. I couldn't tell if that was a remnant from another contract or if that does apply to this contract.
No, it's a cut and paste he did from the,
So that is an error. Okay.
we should probably say attachment A excluding the terms and conditions if it's in there, because at least,
that's fine.
because at least, I mean, I could see if you didn't have this in there, but at least the way it
Right.
came to us, this is all together. I had just assumed this was attachment A, but it's all together. I didn't even think until I was sitting here with the terms and conditions issue. But I think you would have an issue where if there was something in their TNCs and not in ours, I think you'd have an argument that what was in their TNCs would govern if it didn't conflict with ours. But it's an additional term that we don't have. I think we want to be excluding all of their terms and conditions unless we agree to them, which it sounds like you think we're not.
No, that's typically, I would just throw them right out. So
Yeah.
Usually you have a segregated proposal for work and a price term.
So the issues that jumped out at me, there was the item 3.
My understanding was this might be time sensitive because of that DEP administrative consent order.
More reason to get it right. So item 3 in the terms of Weston and Sampson's, item 3 grabbed me, item 12 contradicts the contract terms that we have, and item 16 says, "It is understood and agreed that the services or work performed under this proposal or any agreement are not subject to a provision of any uniform commercial code. Any terms and conditions set forth in owner's purchase order, requisition, or other notice or authorization to proceed are inapplicable to the services under this proposal or any related agreement, except when specifically provided for in full on the face of such purchase order, requisition, or notice or authorization specifically accepted in writing by Weston and Sampson."
This is boilerplate that they have that doesn't have any application to this, so.
Right, but I think we should have the contract specifically excluded.
I don't have a problem with that.
Right. I mean, can we amend it to say attachment A excluding Weston and Sampson's terms and conditions?
Sure.
Because that's the intent, right? The intent is
Right,
not to agree to the
absolutely.
terms and
It's,
conditions.
or from the reverse, strictly the scope of work and,
And they probably understand that's true too, they just stick these in every single
Right,
thing
yeah,
they send in, but if you end up with a beef, they're not gonna say, oh no, we didn't think that applied.
I'm just the dumb guy that reads, I'm just the dumb guy that reads the terms and conditions. 'Cause it's like,
well, here we go with the ex-procurement officer's input.
I work with the general counsel for a construction company. His view is you don't want the contract to ever define how you do things, but you want to make sure the contract is right, because if things go south, this is where people go.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so it's got to be revised?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my question about this was, we're having to do this study because of something that we didn't do apparently at the wastewater treatment plant.
The amount exceeded the maximum
And so are
permitted.
we getting something out of this study that's useful to us as a town, or is this just?
We have no choice, DEP has.
I know
put
we
it-
have no choice,
Yeah.
that we've been mandated to do it by DEP.
We are going to lower our phosphorus levels from this.
This is a
This'll help
major
us lower our
policy
phosphorus
thing.
levels.
Yeah, this is gonna come up with the strategy to get the phosphorus levels back under
Okay,
control.
so it is some use, then, good.
So we can put this off till next time. Mark, does they have to start work between now and July 31st?
I don't know. I never saw the administrative
It's time
consent order.
sensitive, but I'll talk to Mo, and I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah, that's, would you approve it with that change?
I think if we exclude the terms and conditions,
Yeah,
All my issues were on the terms and conditions, the contradictions.
so just
vote to approve it, assuming that the terms and conditions are
with
excluded.
with language added excluding, the
Residence
attachment A
terms and
exclude
conditions.
the terms and conditions.
And confirming that that proposal letter is attachment A. I still haven't seen attachment A, or unless I have, but it's not identified as such.
Yeah.
That was it, what you had, the terms and conditions, at the very least was attached as boilerplate to the proposal.
Right, right.
Are you okay with that, Pete, if we
Yep.
approve it?
Yeah, yeah,
If the
I think we
T&Cs
probably
are
should.
excluded and assuming the scope of work is attachment A?
Right.
And I'm also
So the
viewing
proposal letter
this,
is
you know,
attachment A.
this would be way more significant if we were talking about a significant purchase of a tangible good or something, as opposed to the consulting services that they're actually providing here.
Yeah, a piece of this is sending a contract to the selectmen to sign and approve. It doesn't have anything that, it's the comment we made a
Well,
couple months ago
that's
about.
something that we talked about, Chris and I, just going forward as an area that.
Don't steal my evaluation items.
So with those two understandings, that the letter is attachment A and that excludes the terms and conditions, do we have a motion?
Yes.
to approve, and we can come by and sign this, assuming that it gets modified.
So I move that we approve the Weston and Sampson contract, subject to revision indicating that the Weston and Sampson terms and conditions are not included, and confirmation that the proposal letter the Weston and Sampson submitted is in fact intended to be attachment A, addressing scope of work and payment terms.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So Matthew Borelli requests the Board of Selectmen sign the regulatory agreement for the local initiative project Hillside Meadows now.
Hillside Meadows?
Hillside Meadows, located at 80 North Meadow Road. It had a different name last time.
It did.
I think it was just
I
Hillside
think it was
Apartments
just
or something.
Hillside Projects or something,
Yeah.
Hillside Meadows, and it looks like they have already started to bring some equipment on site.
I saw that they were
Well,
taking it.
we get
Yeah.
a meadow out of there.
Well, you know, it's on North Meadows Road.
Yeah, right.
It's by the Meadows.
All three of those have to be signed
Okay.
and notarized, and will.
This seems to be the standard.
It is the standard.
Agreement.
Mark reviewed it and DHCD reviewed it, and both have submitted
Yeah.
changes to it. So
I mean, they tweaked it a little bit, but the basic provisions are DHCD's, and they rejected some of the changes that they had proposed.
Peter Gus, do you have any comments on this
Nope,
one?
nope.
All right, good.
all three of those copies have to be signed.
Okay.
The DHCD requires 3 originals.
And it's full.
So
Department is ready.
I move that we approve the regulatory agreement for a local initiative project, Hillside Meadows, located at 80 North Meadows Road.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So the next item is the Norwood Hospital Affiliation Agreement. We're going to defer that.
We're gonna defer that. You have not signed that in the past. It's always been between the fire chief and the hospital, but Mark and I are gonna review the contract with Chief Carrico and go over that before your signatures.
Okay, and then Chief Meany requests the chairman to sign the civil service appointee list.
Yes.
Which I
So
can
this
do.
is the 2 candidates that you have already approved.
Mm-hmm.
Have met all of the requirements you set out, including the physical abilities test, physical exam, and background check. And we are now notifying civil service that they are ready to move on to the academy.
The next one here, Mark, is signing the Tallerman engagement letter.
Do we need to, do you need to just sign that, or?
I think I just signed it. I don't think we
Okay,
need a motion.
Okay.
We don't need a motion for that, for the civil service appointee list.
No, a motion to sign.
Oh, you need a motion, sorry.
I need a
You
motion to
I
sign.
move that we authorize Chairman Marcucci to sign the civil service appointee list provided by Chief Meany.
Second.
All in favor?
Yep.
This, based on our discussion in executive session, are we going to defer the Tallerman agreement until we meet with him, or is?
No,
Okay. We're doing this now.
right, because he needs to be engaged so he can start preparing how he wants to respond to the pending complaint. Actually, it hasn't even, as you may or may not be aware, on a zoning appeal, within 20 days, the appeal has to be taken and the town clerk given notice of the fact that it has been, but then there has to subsequently be service on the individual members, so that technically hasn't even been serviced. We just have notice from the first step having been taken, so we have some time. But he
That
needs
was
to,
always one of my gripes about being on the ZBA, was I kept getting sued, and they would serve me by certified mail, and I had to
Yeah.
always run down to the post office to pick up the suit papers.
some people don't, most people don't pick up certified mail.
Oh, no one told me that.
You know that was an option.
Man,
What, I can say this in front of three lawyers. Lawyers are the only remaining industry that can simply establish an hourly rate with no cap and no estimate of how much is there, and it's just whatever it is. Is there, do we,
That's what that's what I had talked about having him in for at a later time, a legal litigation plan, which would involve,
so this is basically agreeing to the fundamental terms under which we will do business and.
right. It's the same agreement we had with him on the
Dale Street.
40B.
Okay.
And it's pretty reasonable, actually.
does he have a municipal rate?
He has a municipal rate, and he also doesn't charge for extras, overhead stuff.
Doesn't charge for paralegal work either.
So we need a motion?
Yep.
Move that we vote to assign the client fee agreement from Tellerman.
Mead, Tellerman, and
Mead,
Costa.
Tellerman and Costa LLC for support with legal
Second?
activities.
All in favor?
Yep.
This one for me to sign?
There should be 3 in there.
But I sign each one.
You can sign.
All right. Dangerous dog hearing? Mark, are we gonna reschedule it, or what's the plan?
I had a conversation with the attorney for the dog owner today, and his people are not available on the 31st. On the other hand, he's reached out to Attorney Cohen and has not had a response. And I gave Attorney Langer, who represents the Rodriguez's, my views on how this should go, which is basically that the two attorneys should make contact and also contact Ms. Brown, the keeper at the time of this incident, and work something out, either that there's a new date or that they're gonna withdraw and give us something in writing well before the 31st.
All right. I mean, we're required by the bylaw to hold a hearing, right, on the dangerousness of the dog, right? That's what the bylaw says.
Yeah,
Upon
well, the
upon
statute
request.
says it.
Right.
too.
Upon request, we have to
Right.
hold a hearing,
Right.
and the question at that hearing is the dangerousness of the dog and what should be done about it.
That's right. It's a public safety issue. It is not an opportunity for private parties to
Right.
engage in pretrial discovery.
Right. And so, I mean, in theory, if they would like to be present for this hearing as the requesting person, I don't have an objection to rescheduling it. I mean, unless they were witnesses to the incident or have knowledge of the dangerousness of the dog, I don't know that any of them have anything to.
Well, actually, the
These are the
burden
owners?
is on the complaining party to establish
So
what
they
it
do get to
is.
present at the
Right,
thing.
and as
Oh,
I
okay.
understand,
These are the owners of the dog, right?
the Rodriguez's are the owners of the
Yeah.
dog. They had,
Oh.
the dog was in the possession of Brown.
Oh, so these are the owners of the dog who can't
Right,
be there. Oh, we
yes.
should
Right.
definitely reschedule it then,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm sorry, I thought these were the complainants who were,
No.
oh, okay.
No,
All
no,
right.
the complainants have the burden of going forward,
Okay.
basically.
All right, well, let's reschedule that to a time that they can be here.
So I understand your meetings are the 14th and the 21st in August.
Yeah.
I want to keep the pressure on for now, and in the interim, work this out. It's on my diary.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get this also resolved in terms of what kind of a business this woman is operating, and that she's compliant with zoning and the concerns, if any, of our animal control officer, so that we don't have any kind of repetitions.
At this point, this is just an issue of this item currently is on the agenda. for
Just
the
keep it
31st.
tabled till the,
We're fine to have it taken off the agenda, but it's an agenda question. And
you'd have to continue the hearing to a time and date certain, so.
Move it to August 14th or August 21st, or preference?
I'd put it out to the 21st.
21st? All right, rescheduled to the 21st. All right, minutes. January 30th, 2018. I did not have any comments on this one.
Hold on. January 30th, it was okay? Yep.
The only change I had on all 7 of the minutes that we got was the same comment, the same change that you had already made, Mike, when I saw your change.
For April 10th.
Whatever your change was for that one date. I
Okay.
don't remember the date.
So we have a motion on January 30th.
I move that we accept the minutes as published for the January 30th Board of Selectmen's meeting.
Second?
All in favor?
Yep.
February 6th.
February 6th.
I only had one correction to this one, just in the spelling of Laurel Scotty's name. I did that to you.
I spelled it wrong?
You added an E on the end.
And I sent Christine a
Give her
file.
coffee every morning, she's not gonna be happy with me.
I sent
I have your
you an
comments.
electronic copy, just so you guys know. I made a couple of editorial comments on what I had to say at the meeting when Kevin Stoddard brought up the issue of some affordable housing available in town. Just because the minutes hadn't picked up the fact that some of that affordable housing isn't really in a format that's useful for seniors. I did a little bit of minor editing on the senior housing. And the only question I had, and there were a couple of typos, but that's it. The only question I had is when we go into a closed session after an open meeting, do the meeting minutes need to report when that closed session was adjourned? Because the meeting minutes don't actually ever
No,
report the meeting.
because you don't come
timing.
back into public session.
No, there is no official
You have,
adjournment.
well, they would be indicated in the executive session minutes what time it adjourned.
Okay.
So we have to do the executive session minutes at some point.
Yes.
So I would move that we approve the meeting minutes for February 6, 2018, as revised by inputs from Selectman Marcucci and Selectman Werby. And Pete, did or didn't have any?
I didn't have any
Okay.
on any of these.
So
Except
approved
for
as
one.
revised.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
All right, March 6th, 2018. I did not have any comments on this one.
Mine, it was okay, except on my selectmen's report. Rather than elusive, it should have been elusive. That's at the tail end there.
All right, do we have a motion to
Motion,
approve?
I move that we approve the meeting minutes published for March 6th with that minor editorial correction.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
So March 6th, 2018, the working session, my only correction was, I'm not sure I'm the vice chairman, just to call myself the acting chairman for that meeting, so they call it to order. I don't think I'm actually elected as the vice chairman, so that's the only one.
Yeah, you probably would've been, it would've been his clerk.
But I'm putting in for my pension in 30 years. I was vice chairman of the Board of Selectmen. I should get an extra pension bump for that, right? Any edits, Gus?
I had one, which was the start time for the 6 PM session at the top of the header, reads 7 PM.
No. All right. We have a motion as corrected?
So this is for the 6 PM meeting.
Yep.
I move that we approve the minutes for the March 6 PM meeting with minor typographical corrections as discussed.
I second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. March 27, 2018, I did not have comments on this one.
Let's see, March 27th, I had another one. I sent you, so March 27th, Christine, you got my, March 27th, I had a couple of changes.
They were remarkably detailed, by the way, Chris.
The only, these were actually all typographical, but there were enough of them that I sent them. I added in the names of the people who spoke, and I had the same question about the adjournment time. So you got my electronic, they're
I have the
purely
electronic one.
typographical. So I move that we approve the meeting minutes published from the March 27th meeting, incorporating the the editorial changes that I provided to Christine on electronic copy.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
April 3rd.
That was okay.
The only comment I had is on the top of the second page. I don't think we need an E at the end of Band-Aid. I think it's just Band-Aid with no E at the end. All right, motion to approve.
I move that we approve the meeting minutes published for the April 3rd meeting, incorporating the editorial changes submitted by Selectman Marcucci.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yep.
All right, and finally, April 10th, 2018, Board of Selectmen meeting minutes. I circulated my edits to this. You know, the only thing I had in addition to that, and I wanted to double check Jessica Riley's name. I think it might be R-E-I, two L's.
I think it is. We'll change it.
And I corrected Leo's name and Anna Mae's name.
And if you could send that, I had typos, so if you give that one, it wasn't even worth doing the electronic file, they're just typos.
So,
Okay.
motion to approve as corrected by Dustin and by me.
Okay, I move that we approve the meeting minutes published for the April 10th meeting, incorporating the minor typographical changes submitted by Selectman Marcucci and Selectman Murphy.
Well, I had a substantive addition too in that.
Oh, and all changes, editorial or otherwise.
Do you have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yep.
So we are probably getting close to caught up on that.
We are getting very close, except for the last two that I'm in charge of.
That's okay.
But we're
Here's,
getting there.
let's see, and I had a mark, are we done with the 227? But I think we exchanged emails.
227's already been posted.
That's already been
Yep.
posted, so that one
Yep.
is done, okay.
I meant to tell you, meanwhile,
Okay.
that this morning.
So the only other item here,
Um,
I'm sorry, we have a couple of more things. So,
I would like to talk to you about the informational, briefly.
oh, I want to talk about that too.
Okay.
Anything on the selectmen reports? Pete?
I happened to have a conversation with Patrick Larkin, and I asked him about how many school kids in the units that they've sold. He told me they've sold 13 units, and only one of them has any children in it. It's someone who moved from Medfield because of a divorce and wanted to stay in town and had kids. So that seemed to be very,
That's different than the
Different.
information I've been getting. Yeah.
but that was very interesting. I also happened to come across a figure that said that in the 2,000 units at the Pine Hills, they had 42 school children. So the Pine Hills is making a lot of money for town of Plymouth.
Nice golf course too.
But I think it just goes to the point that you can, as a town, we can make money by building housing if we build the right type of housing.
There's no question that Ralph Costello's condos are a profit.
$550,000 a year profit we're making out of that.
Gus?
I think I had, the only minor point, we've got the information came in for the senior housing survey, and that's kind of all being processed. There's a lot of it, but that's being processed right now.
Affordable Housing Trust Board met last Thursday. We awarded a bid to Niche Engineering for the site survey of the Medfield City Hospital property, the layout, the whole contours and all that kind of stuff. And we also met with the Legion at our trust board meeting on Thursday. The sentiment from the Legion now seems to be in favor of a sale of the property without a facility for them being built on the property. And so the executive board and the membership had a meeting. David Connor was there. He indicated that maybe that's not the last word, maybe it is, but that they may be looking to go out to talk to some prospective purchasers. There was a representative there of Calumet Corporation, which has been in discussions to propose a fairly significant housing development on that site. And there was a brief update from, Sarah was there as well, and Jim Brand from the planning board. And the planning board has discussed as well the possibility of rezoning that site from RS to commercial, the location where they are. So all that is up in the air, nothing in particular to happen. It looks like we're gonna meet again. I had tried to give the board members the summer off. It looks like we're gonna meet again on August 2nd at the DPW. Bob Borelli has a senior-focused proposal for senior-focused condos on Adams Street, down past West Street, more towards the center. So he's had a neighborhood meeting on that, and now he's gonna come back to meet with the board about that potential project. So that will be August 2nd, 7:30 at the DPW.
I need a couple clarifications. So the first one is, you formally continued the dangerous dog hearing to August 21st.
Yes.
You would take a vote to do it at August 21st at 7 o'clock, and I'll notify everybody.
Yes.
I move that we reschedule the dangerous dog hearing from July 31st to August 21st
At 7 o'clock.
at 7 o'clock.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Second thing is, I understand that the A&R plan has been fully endorsed now, and Sarah gave it to me to record. I just wanted to confirm that you're on board with that happening, because that'll make it legally effective.
Anything else?
No.
All right. Informational. I thought this was awesome.
I did too. So you received, I don't know if ever, do you want to, did you Google him?
So, you see this?
I don't think I did.
So we
No.
received from Lowell George of Stockton, California. He found a postcard of Medfield Town Hall circa 1905 in an antique store in California, and he thought he would send it along. And I'll just read the letter because it's a delightful letter. And it says, "Good morning. I hope this letter brightens your day. I was at an antique store here and found this old circa 1905 picture card showing your beautiful town hall. It's an old-time classic for sure, so I said to myself, by golly, I think I'll send it home where it can be appreciated. Our heritage is important to us all and should be preserved. Lots of changes, I suppose, too. Enlarged and posted up, it will cause some nice conversation. Well, I gave $6 for it, so if you want it for 7 or 8, so why, sure, that's okay. Throw in a little postage if you want to. My wife used to laugh at me and say, if you hear from them, you'll have to take me out to lunch. I turned 90 years of age on June 26th, and I'm still going strong as far as I know. I like to call my little hobby redistribution of happiness. Our world sure needs it. Thank you, Godspeed, and have a super good summer season. Lowell George, Brookdale Assisted Living, Stockton, California. P.S. I picked your place off the net. I figure I could trust you folks. My daughter says you can find me on Google, but I never look."
Have you Googled him?
I did not.
Oh, Mr. George has been doing this for about 20 years. He's received quite a bit amount of press and feedback. There are some boards of selectmen in different towns who have sent him cease and desist letters saying that he's a scam artist. But for the most part, all of the letters have been very positive. I talked to a few town administrators who have recently received postcards as well. So with your approval tonight, I would like to take your picture with the postcard and send it to him, and he posts them in his room in
absolutely.
California.
Would
And
you
I will
him a
send,
pin?
I will
Send
send him a pin, and I will,
$10?
and I will send him $10.
Do you need a motion on that, or are we okay?
I would like a motion, I'm going to include the motion in the letter.
Does that screw up your little financial thing?
Yeah.
No, because I'm gonna add a line, KT Trust Fund.
All depends how many more postcards he's picked up. You like that one? Here's one.
It's fascinating how much that tower, how similar that tower is to the one that was reconstructed here, because we didn't have the benefit of that, I don't think, when that was designed.
The tree to the left looks pretty sad.
Yeah.
Well, let me formally move that we, in gratitude, send a message back to Mr. George, thanking him for forwarding the postcard to us, enclosing a town pin, $10, and a picture of us holding his postcard at an official Board of Selectmen meeting.
Wait a minute, what do we get for the pins? Maybe we should get the money back from them.
Yeah,
I'll ask him.
deduct $2 from the,
9:27.
second.
5 years from now, we're gonna let her sing, "I came across this pin." And then all right, so we have a second. All in favor?
Do we need a roll call vote on this one? Aye.
I think you should all go home and Google him, it's quite
All
an
right.
interesting
Do we have a
story.
motion to adjourn as well?
I move to adjourn.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Medfield TV, community shows.